Hello again, true crime fans. We've got another mysterious case to explore. The case of Alice Trappler. On April 19, 2012, an incident occurred in a remote area of upstate New York. At approximately 11 p.m., Frank Bennett called 911 to report that an intruder had broken into his home and killed his son, Daniel Bennett. After the attack, the intruder fled the scene. Frank reported that he did not witness the crime. He was in the basement when he heard the front door open and the lights turn on. A short time later, he heard a loud bang. Frank quickly ran upstairs, but when he reached the first floor, he only heard the sound of cars on the street. The mysterious intruder was gone, leaving behind a lifeless body. When the police arrived, they found Frank outside the house, in shock at what he had witnessed. The father could not believe that his beloved son was dead, and he was also afraid that the killer might return. After calming down, Frank's account was confirmed. The police entered the house and found Daniel lying on the sofa in the living room. It appeared that he had been attacked unexpectedly while he was sleeping. After examining the crime scene, forensic experts quickly discovered a spent ammunition box outside the door. It was clear that this was not a robbery because no valuables were missing, and there were no signs of a struggle or forced entry. The attacker had acted quickly, suggesting that the murder occurred in just a few seconds. However, the motive behind the crime remained unclear. Given the situation, the police suspected that it might be due to personal reasons. They began investigating Daniel's family and friends to gather more information. Frank suggested a possible motive for this violent act. His son was scheduled to appear in court the next day to fight for custody of his 5-month-old daughter, Lily. The divorce with Alice had been very difficult. Police considered Daniel's wife, Alice Trappler, to be the prime suspect in the case. Alice Trappler grew up in a small town called Edison. However, she was born in Philadelphia, where she lived with her parents before they bought a farm away from the city to raise their children. After graduating from high school, Alice moved away, attended college, and began working on a construction site in Texas. She eventually returned to Philadelphia and became a successful landscape designer. Alice was an energetic girl from a small town. As a child, she was a bit mischievous, but that did not affect her close relationship with her parents. She often drove 4 hours to Edison to visit them on weekends. During one of these visits, she met Thomas Wesley Borden, who became her first husband. This meeting took place in 2002. He had a troubled past, having dropped out of school in the 9th grade. Then a series of troubles began to plague him. Thomas often stole small items, had no steady job, and frequently worked as a repairman on local farms. This was his situation when he met Alice. He immediately fell in love with her vibrant and energetic personality. Thomas was attracted to Alice's natural beauty and intelligence. They had similar personalities, as they were both energetic and outgoing. At the time, Alice was in a relationship with another man, but she ended it for Thomas, and their romance quickly blossomed. Within 6 months, they were married and moved to Philadelphia, where Alice owned a house. Thomas supported Alice in everything. Alice had always dreamed of having a large family, but she struggled to conceive. Therefore, she took on the role of stepmother to Thomas's 2 daughters from a previous marriage. However, after only a few months of living together, Alice realized that she did not truly understand Thomas and had rushed into the marriage. At first, she tried to control their situation, but soon discovered that Thomas was unpredictable and irresponsible. He would often leave home for days at a time, leaving Alice and the children behind. This behavior frustrated Alice, while Thomas grew tired of her worries. Moreover, he showed little concern for Alice's feelings. Although she tried to maintain the marriage for 4 years, Alice eventually lost patience. She did not want to leave Thomas's children, to whom she was very attached, in the care of their irresponsible father. So, she filed for divorce and also requested custody. In 2009, a challenging trial began, with neither side willing to compromise. Finally, they reached an agreement that the girls would live with their paternal grandparents, who would take good care of them. Thomas's children still visit Alice in Edison regularly. After moving in with her mother in 2010, Alice bought an old farmhouse. She renovated the house, making use of her construction skills. Her business is thriving and is expected to grow even more in the near future. Overall, her life has improved significantly since the divorce. She has yet to realize her dream of having children of her own and rarely sees Thomas's children. Living alone has become boring for her. Her life changed dramatically when a new man, Daniel Bennett, entered her life. They met online in late 2010. He also grew up on a farm and is a strong man who always helps his parents with hard work. Daniel has a stubborn personality and can be rude, but he has never been in trouble with the law. In February 2011, Alice learned that she was pregnant. Overjoyed, she shared the news with Daniel, who was also delighted and decided to move in with her. They soon got married, but Alice's controlling nature soon emerged. She wanted to control every aspect of their lives, while Daniel valued his freedom and did not like being controlled. This led to frequent minor disagreements. These conflicts escalated, resulting in increasingly irrational arguments over small issues, which left Daniel frustrated. Just 6 months after meeting, the couple decided to split after Alice hit Daniel over the head with a coffee pot. He moved out, calling her crazy, and returned to live with his parents. However, Daniel still wanted to be involved in his daughter's life after she was born and sought to share custody, so he made an effort to maintain a relationship with Alice. Daniel contacted her almost every day to check on her well-being, but Alice never responded. She ignored all his messages, which frustrated him. Their relationship was strained. Alice often behaved rudely and even threatened him. She said that their communication felt like a conflict. In addition, she refused to see him and was hostile on the phone. It seemed that she did not want to maintain a relationship with him and did not want him to be a part of their child's life. 7 months after their separation, a baby girl was born. Alice did not inform Daniel about the birth and forbade him from seeing the child. This was a significant blow to Daniel, who had been pleading to see his daughter. However, Alice remained steadfast in her decision. So Daniel sought legal help to resolve the situation. According to the lawyer, the mother had no right to deny the father access to his daughter, but to prove this, a trial was necessary. Consequently, Daniel filed a lawsuit in family court to gain access to his child. The proceedings could be lengthy. Finally, a court date was set for April 20. This was a hopeful moment for Daniel, but the hearing never took place. He was murdered in his home the day before. Officers who arrived at the scene spoke to neighbors, some of whom confirmed hearing a loud bang just before an SUV drove away. The front door of the house was open, and Daniel was found dead. The only evidence was a spent 12-gauge cartridge case. A ballistics test is pending, which may provide further clues. Frank said that Daniel often complained about Alice's controlling behavior, especially after they split up when she forbade him from visiting their daughter. After breaking up with Alice, Daniel moved in with his father. On the day Daniel was killed, he was relaxing in front of the TV after a long day at work and fell asleep just before he was murdered. Frank also recalled that last Christmas, Alice called him out of the blue and asked to meet so he could see his granddaughter. He was delighted and agreed, but he used the opportunity to convince Alice to allow Daniel to see their child. He believed that children should have a relationship with both their father and mother. However, Alice became defensive and firmly stated that she would never allow Daniel to see their child. Frank was extremely upset, feeling that Alice's decision was both illegal and unjustified. He believed that Daniel would make a great father and saw no justification for Alice's restrictions. After Alice's call, Daniel sought legal help and went to court, but his hearing was repeatedly postponed until it was rescheduled. Tragically, a murderer disrupted all his plans. The police quickly established a motive for the crime, believing that the connection was not random. First, they needed to talk to Alice, who arrived at the courthouse at around 5 a.m., the day after the murder. Just hours later, Lily's custody hearing took place. The police considered her the prime suspect, and at that time, she was living in Edison, 30 kilometers from the scene of the tragedy. Alice was surprisingly calm when she heard the news of her ex-husband's death. When the police spoke to Alice, it was clear that she was very angry with him. She recounted that he had often insulted her and had been abusive throughout their time together. Alice described Daniel as a bad person who struggled with drug addiction. She also mentioned that they were in a custody battle over their daughter, a legal struggle that Daniel had initiated, and that she was determined not to give in to him. Despite this hostility, Alice insisted that she had nothing to do with the murder. She claimed that she had an alibi for the time of the incident, stating that she was at home with her mother, who later confirmed her story. When asked about a handgun, Alice denied ever having used it, and the police confirmed that the weapon was not registered in her name. However, this did not eliminate her as a suspect, as she could have purchased the weapon illegally, and her alibi was not entirely reliable. Unfortunately, the police were unable to find any information that could advance the case. They then chose to investigate Daniel's other acquaintances and friends who might have had a motive for the crime. Many described Daniel as a difficult person who frequently got into fights at bars. As a result, the police identified several potential suspects who had conflicts with Daniel in various ways. They compiled a long list of these individuals and began interviewing them. Although each had grievances against Daniel, none had a strong motive for the murder. The investigation was losing momentum, and it was clear that a vital lead was needed, as there were too many angry residents in the city who might want to take revenge on him. It was necessary to narrow down the list of suspects. One of Daniel's neighbors went to the police station after the murder. While she was getting the mail, she discovered a shotgun shell casing on the road. Concerned, she reported her discovery to the sheriff's department. At first glance, the shell casing did not seem unusual since hunting season had just begun, and many people in rural areas used that type of ammunition. However, because it was close to the crime scene, it had the potential to be important evidence. When the police arrived, they compared the shell casing to the one that caused Daniel's death. They found that they were an exact match. The police were then able to trace the shell casing to the store where it was purchased. They searched the area around where the shell casing was found and discovered 3 more shell casings. All of these had been purchased from the hunting section of a local Walmart. This discovery provided a vital lead in the investigation. The police requested surveillance footage from the store and reviewed it. They identified a man who had purchased the boxes of ammunition just 4 hours before the murder, around 7 p.m. The footage clearly showed him, and the police were able to track him as he left the store, including his license plate, thanks to outdoor cameras. The police quickly identified the owner of one of the vehicles as Thomas West Borden, Alice's first husband. While this footage was not enough to convict him, it was a clue for the police to investigate Thomas further. They had 2 main suspects, Alice and Thomas. It was likely that they had planned to kill Daniel together. While Thomas could be considered a potential perpetrator or accomplice, the only evidence against him was the purchase of the ammunition. Alice was not officially considered a suspect because she had an alibi confirmed by her mother. The GPS on her phone showed that she was at home, but the seasoned police officer suspected that she might be the mastermind behind the events. The police contacted Thomas, asking him to come to the station for questioning without providing a specific reason. They hoped to indirectly confirm their suspicions through him. However, Thomas informed the police over the phone that he was out of town at the time of the call. He could not provide an exact date for his return, saying that he could be absent for 2 weeks to a month due to important business. He then stated that unless the police had a warrant for his arrest, he had no intention of going to the police station over a minor matter. This situation raised suspicion, and he understood why they wanted to talk to him. As the phone conversation continued, Thomas became increasingly anxious. At one point, he suddenly declared that he would kill himself if the pressure did not ease. The police realized the urgency of the situation and knew that they needed to quickly locate Thomas before he did anything drastic. They decided to track the GPS location of the call and found him near a cell tower in a suburb of Philadelphia, along with his car. Soon, the pursuit began. The chase lasted only a few blocks before Thomas abandoned his pickup truck in a parking lot and fled on foot. However, another police unit arrived to stop him. Thomas gave a false name, but when asked for identification, he surrendered his driver's license. When the officers discovered the lie, they acted quickly to arrest him. Thomas began to run away again, leading several cars and police officers to chase him. They pursued him to the nearest train tracks, possibly because he intended to use the train to escape and distract the police. However, Thomas was exhausted and realized that he could not outrun them. In a moment of desperation, he jumped in front of a train and took his own life. Some even blamed the police for his death. This development left the police without their only lead regarding Daniel's murder. In their desperation, the police decided to talk to people who had interacted with Thomas in the days before his death. Thomas's half-brother Nathan Hand lived with him. Shortly before Daniel's murder, Thomas had moved in with Nathan, and they spent a lot of time together. During this period, Thomas rekindled his relationship with Alice and felt happy, as he had struggled to cope with their breakup. He had hoped to reunite with her, so he agreed to resume contact. However, Nathan suspected that Alice had an ulterior motive for returning to Thomas. Nathan said that just before the incident, Alice had made a request regarding Daniel. For the sake of the person he loved, Thomas agreed to everything and followed Alice's instructions. Nathan recalled that at around 8 p.m. on April 19, Thomas returned from Walmart and quickly began preparing for something important, saying that he would confront Daniel at Alice's request. Nathan observed that Thomas was wearing camouflage pants, a dark shirt, and a mask. When asked about his plans, Thomas insisted that he would confront Daniel. Nathan tried to dissuade him, but to no avail. Thomas asked Nathan to drive him to Daniel's house. During the drive, Thomas revealed that he not only intended to beat Daniel, but also to kill him. He was determined to get rid of Daniel once and for all, despite Nathan's attempts to convince him otherwise. Thomas also mentioned that this plan originated with Alice. He kept in touch with her throughout the evening via phone and text messages. When they arrived at Daniel's house around 11 p.m., Thomas retrieved the weapons from the trunk of the car. He claimed that Alice had given him the weapons for this purpose and that he had purchased the ammunition. They got out of the car and stood on either side of the front door. Nathan pushed the door open and turned on the lights, allowing Thomas to rush inside and kill Daniel. They then fled the scene, jumping into the car and driving away. As they left, Thomas threw the remaining shell casings out the window, landing in a neighbor's yard and eventually leading the police to their door. Nathan claimed that they buried the weapons at the park. Police were able to locate the weapon based on Nathan's description. He also mentioned that Alice was not present during the attack. She was at home and was in contact with Thomas on the phone. Nathan was arrested in connection with the crime. On April 24, a deputy sheriff visited Alice's home, and she denied any involvement in the crime. In 2013, Alice went to trial for the murder of Daniel Bennett. She was charged with multiple crimes, facing a possible sentence of 15 years to life in prison. By this time, Thomas, the real perpetrator, was dead. The prosecution argued that he was just a pawn controlled by the real mastermind behind the crime. They believed that Alice had planned and manipulated Thomas into carrying out the act. The prosecution gathered a significant amount of evidence that linked Alice to the crime. Evidence included correspondence between her and Thomas discussing the case, as well as surveillance camera footage showing Thomas purchasing ammunition. Additionally, Thomas's half-brother Nathan confirmed Alice's involvement in the crime. Nathan Hand reached a plea deal to shorten his sentence by pleading guilty to manslaughter in exchange for helping to solve the case, resulting in a 9-year prison sentence. The defense attempted to exonerate Alice, acknowledging her hostility toward Daniel. They argued that the situation was an act of self-defense, claiming that Alice had endured domestic violence for 6 months. They asserted that Alice, a victim of violence as a child, was determined to prevent her daughter from experiencing the same, which explained her strong opposition to sharing custody with Daniel. After deliberations, the jury unanimously convicted Alice Trapler of premeditated murder. She was sentenced to 25 years in prison. Throughout the trial, she remained calm, showing no remorse or emotion. Alice expressed dissatisfaction with her 25-year prison sentence and filed several appeals, all of which were rejected. Hello everyone, today we will learn about another case. The case of Clelia Medina. Early in the morning on Sunday, February 17, 2008, a man was walking with his dog when he suddenly noticed that the dog was attracted to something strange on the ground. Looking closely, he realized it was a series of drops forming a path. He began to follow them, moving parallel to the canal, not far from Lambersart, France. The drops continued, leading him to the very shore where he noticed a body half submerged in the water. It was swollen and very pale. The man immediately reported it to the police. In the name of law enforcement, forensic experts began to carefully examine the area and the body itself. However, there was nothing that could help identify the female victim. It was not possible to find a handbag that might have contained documents, a mobile phone, or bank cards. The body was taken for an autopsy, and the police continued to investigate the area around the canal for any clues about the identity of the victim. While the medical examiner was working in his office, detectives checked the databases of missing persons to find anything that could help identify the body. In this area, no recent disappearances had been recorded. When it became obvious that the unidentified victim could not be recognized, forensic scientists began searching the canal bank for clues indicating the identity of the deceased or the perpetrator. In the relatively small area where the body was found, cigarette butts and anything that could contain human DNA were collected. To ensure that nothing was missed, a team of divers was called in to check the bottom of the canal. This decision turned out to be correct. One diver managed to retrieve a car jack from the bottom, found just a meter away from the body. The jack, belonging to a standard set for a wing car, had a serial number indicating it was used in a vehicle produced in 1997. It had been in the water for quite a long time, so traces from its surface could have washed away. However, during the examination, human bloodstains were found. They continued to collect data. Initially, it was believed that the victim had been strangled, as characteristic marks remained on her neck. However, the forensic expert concluded that the cause of death was multiple strong blows to the head with a blunt object. The location and shape of the marks resembled those made by a car jack. There were suggestions that the girl could have died in a road accident, but the longer they attempted to prove this, the less plausible the theory seemed. It was soon decided to abandon this idea. It clearly indicated a methodical beating after which the body was simply thrown into the water. A toxicological examination showed that the victim was either intoxicated from alcohol or under the influence of prohibited substances. The deceased was fully dressed, and no signs of abuse were found. At the same time, there were no marks on her hands that would indicate she had fought for her life. The attack had likely come as a surprise to her, and she was unable to defend herself. According to the forensic expert, she died around 5 a.m. The police had only one clue that could help solve the mystery of her identity: a small stamp on her palm that had miraculously not washed away in the water. Such stamps are given to club visitors at the entrance, allowing security to recognize them without the need to check passes or flyers. Typically, these stamps are unique to each establishment and are not replicated. It was quickly discovered that the victim had visited the Buccaneer Club located nearby shortly before her death. Detectives arrived at the club, immediately spoke with the administration and employees, providing them with a description of the deceased. Two young men recognized the girl because she occasionally attended the disco, but no one knew her name. The detectives managed to access the recordings from the CCTV cameras. Thanks to that, the victim was identified. She had arrived at the club the day before she was found in the canal, apparently leaving Buccaneer around 3 a.m. and being killed by 5 a.m. What happened to her between 3 a.m. and 5 a.m. remained unknown. The police spoke to regular patrons and staff in the hope that someone recognized her from the CCTV footage, but no valuable clues about her identity emerged. So far, no missing persons reports had been filed. The police were left with only one option to identify the deceased: to hold a press conference and appeal to the public through the media. Detectives provided a detailed description of the victim and showed footage from the club's CCTV cameras. Within a few hours, a woman admitting that she was the mother of 18-year-old Clelia Medina. She reported that her daughter had gone to the club about a day before these events and had not returned or been in touch. She immediately became concerned. Relatives and friends had no idea where Clelia might have spent the night. No one had seen Clelia after visiting the club, which caused anxiety and prompted her mother to search for her. Approximately 36 hours had passed when she managed to contact the local police station in Lille, but received the standard excuse that law enforcement officers did not want to waste time looking for a girl who had simply gone on a spree after the club and was likely spending time with friends or a boyfriend. When she saw a news program about the police announcing the discovery of a body and the terrible circumstances surrounding the tragedy, she initially tried to dismiss any bad thoughts about it possibly being her daughter. However, the worry persisted. She literally felt that something bad had happened to her daughter and feared that it was Clelia's body that had been found in the canal. She acted extremely worried and was very agitated, providing somewhat confused information due to her emotional state. Therefore, the police decided to verify the information with Clelia's cousin, who had been with Clelia that evening. The young man confirmed some of the details provided by Clelia's mother. He helped to clarify valuable information such as the clothing and piercing locations that Clelia had. The victim's identity was almost completely matched. Clelia's mother was notified of the coincidence and was invited to identify the body. All doubts were finally dispelled. The mother was shocked by her daughter's tragic death, and she immediately began to cry. She struggled to understand who could have done this, as her daughter was an ordinary girl who did not associate with problematic people. According to her cousin, they had planned to go to Buccaneer Club together, the seal of which was found on her hand. He described his relationship with Clelia as very friendly and warm. They communicated well, supported each other. That evening, everyone was in good spirits. From the very beginning, Clelia's mother had been worried about her daughter attending the party. She felt strongly that Clelia should not go. To calm her mother, Clelia explained that they would not be walking home alone and that everything would be fine. Despite the fact that her cousin took her to the club, he did not intend to stay there long. Clelia managed to reassure her mother by telling her that her ex-boyfriend, 19-year-old Julian Saoli, was supposed to drive her home. The whole family knew him well and trusted him. Julian Saoli and Clelia had been in a relationship for about a year, which had ended a couple of months before Clelia's death. As Clelia's mother noted, even after the breakup, they continued to communicate as friends. law enforcement officers decided to check the records of telephone conversations, which verified that Clelia had indeed called her ex-boyfriend when she left the club. However, the police did not have time to visit his home, as he came to the station on his own initiative to talk to the investigators. Julian was eager to help because he was worried about what had happened. In his statement, he emphasized that Clelia had contacted him after he left the cinema. He promptly went to the club, where he picked her up in his car in the parking lot. They spent some time together at his house, but at about 4:30 in the morning, Clelia headed home. Julian believed that she could have been attacked during this time. The police immediately questioned why he did not drive Clelia home at such a late hour. He explained that it was only a short walk left to get home, as the houses were located close together. It was already getting light, he was very tired and drunk, so cannot take her home. Clelia herself did not want to impose on anyone and was not afraid for her safety. Unfortunately, Julian simply went to bed and turned off his mobile phone to avoid being disturbed. Until he woke up, he could not reach Clelia but did not think much of it, believing that she could be spending time with someone new, as there was no romantic relationship between them anymore. However, upon learning about the tragedy in the Medina family, Julian felt compelled to help with the investigation, so provided his testimony. The detectives, however, immediately suspected that he might not just want to help. Such behavior is often seen in murderers attempting to divert suspicion from themselves. Thus, they decided not to let him leave too quickly, hoping he would either incriminate himself or provide genuine assistance in the investigation. Suspicion grew stronger as Julian reacted very calmly to the details of the crime. He did not show any emotions when looking at the disfigured image, and he appeared neither upset nor shocked. His lack of reaction to the details of his ex-girlfriend's death, combined with the fact that he was the last person to see her, made him a person of interest to the detectives. It is known that in such cases, exes are often involved, who kill out of jealousy, resentment, or revenge. To establish or refute this, the investigators asked Julian to show them his car. The detective specifically did not mention the jack that had been found in the canal. He agreed to this request without hesitation. According to his confession, he arrived at the police station in the same car in which he had driven Clelia from the club to his home. The policeman went out into the street with him, and in the parking lot, they found a notch indicating the year of manufacture of the car matched the jack. As soon as the door was opened, they felt a very strong smell of cleaning products. The interior was excessively clean for a young guy. It seemed that a very thorough cleaning had been carried out recently. Nevertheless, Julian immediately justified himself by saying that he had bought a new car only 10 days prior, and the previous owner had cleaned it well before selling it. The police were most interested in the possibility of blood being present. Perhaps Julian could have attacked Clelia in his car or transported the body after the attack. When the mat in the trunk was lifted, they found several suspicious dark red drops that were collected for further analysis. However, none of these stains belonged to Clelia. Nevertheless, Julian continued to be considered the main suspect. It was believed that this was an attack based on passion, so the killer must have known the victim well. Furthermore, the make of the car matched the jack, with the jack was found at the bottom of the canal. Julian seemed ideal as a suspect based on all the criteria. After, they found one valuable clue, a blood stain on one of Julian's sneakers. After examination, it was possible to prove that the blood belonged to Clelia, but it was not possible to date it with precision. Julian insisted that the stain appeared by chance when Clelia had a nosebleed about a month before the tragedy. However, his words could not be confirmed or refuted, so this evidence turned out to be indirect. Even Clelia's family was sure that Julian could not have done this. He had always been a very nice guy. Clelia's mother believed wholeheartedly that he was not capable of murder. She commented that Clelia was almost crazy about Julian based on his appearance. He was very kind, loving, and gave Clelia many gifts. However, their relationship was not entirely smooth. They often argued. Julian as an accomplished young man for his age. He grew up in a strict but loving family in Lille, France. From an early age, he was interested in sports, especially football, which he played with his father. He was not prone to violence and avoided fights, despite being in perfect shape. However, he was forced to drop out of school because of football, wanting to build a sports career, and simply chose training over textbooks. His parents supported their son's decision, especially since he was mature enough for his age. At the same time, they described him as charming but very jealous. They mentioned that he could become upset over a random photo of a stranger on the internet that Clelia was looking at. As their relationship progressed, Julian became more and more jealous. Due to such tumultuous dynamics, they eventually broke up. Despite the tensions, they continued to maintain friendly relations, and everything seemed normal. Except for the circumstantial evidence against Julian, there was no concrete proof. He was released pending further investigation. Then, Julian was arrested and charged with Clelia's murder. He spent about a year in prison, but his lawyer managed to get him released before his trial. Julian repeatedly appealed, claiming there was insufficient evidence to convict him, and was released on bail. However, this lasted until 2011, when his formal trial began. A rather controversial trial lay ahead. From the very beginning, the situation was tense, partly because Clelia's family had changed their opinion about Julian over the lengthy investigation period. They became convinced, based on several dubious facts, that the deceased's ex-boyfriend was indeed a criminal. Clelia's family now demanded punishment for the supposed killer. At this stage, it was necessary to assess the mental health of the suspect. In June 2008, Julian was visited by an expert psychiatrist, who noted no deviations. Julian willingly made contact and described in detail the events related to Clelia. He admitted that there had indeed been several conflicts which ended in slaps to the face. Although he did not think this was normal, he justified himself, citing jealousy regarding Clelia and claiming that she had stolen from him multiple times. After the examination, the specialist concluded that Julian was completely in his right mind and capable of appearing in court. Tension was literally in the air. The defense team escalated the situation to the point where a fight broke out right in the courtroom. Several people were slightly injured, so the trial was postponed because of this unpleasant incident and the subsequent bureaucratic red tape. Everything was delayed for another year until 2012. From February 2009 until the start of the trial in June 2012, Julian lived with his paternal aunts near Paris. She immediately noticed how angry he was. At first, they thought it was connected to the slander against him. However, his discontent grew as the trial approached. Meanwhile, the Medina family accused Julian's lawyer of unnecessarily dragging out the proceedings, which only heightened tensions. The first witnesses began to speak at the meetings. There was a mutual friend of Clelia and Julian who recalled that all three of them had once been driving in a car together after their romantic relationship had ended. Julian had even started dating a new girl, who happened to be one of Clelia's close friends. This situation made she very upset and jealous. Despite their breakup, a conflict ensued between them, which even escalated to physical confrontation. They exchanged blows. At one point, Clelia even attempted to jump out of the moving car, but Julian managed to pull her back inside. By the time the car reached her friend's house, Clelia finally exited and continued yelling at Julian from the street. He tried to calm her down, but she simply waved her hand dismissively and left the scene. This friend was convinced this was not an isolated incident, as outbursts of jealousy and aggression were repeated throughout their relationship. In addition to this event, Clelia's parents recalled several instances during family vacations with Julian where he lost control. They once caught him walking around the apartment with a weapon. However, he had managed to convince Clelia's relatives that it was just a failed joke. They now understood the situation was much more serious. From the very beginning, Clelia had been in great danger. Another friend of Julian recounted an incident where, in a fit of rage, he began to choke one of his girlfriends. The once pleasant, sociable, and good-natured Julian was now portrayed as a monster capable of losing control at any moment. So, the change in the Medina family's attitude toward him did not seem strange. Julian had lied about the time. He told the police that Clelia left his house at 4:30 a.m. Detectives managed to track their mobile phones and prove that they were still together at 5 a.m., which is when Clelia was believed to have died. Subsequently, Clelia's phone unexpectedly turned off at 5:10 a.m. Previously, during an interrogation, Julian said that attempted to contact Clelia again but could not get a response. Detectives believed the call to his ex-girlfriend was made intentionally to create an alibi. Shortly thereafter, Julian's phone also turned off for several hours. Investigators suspected he deliberately turned off his devices to avoid being tracked. Despite all the circumstantial evidence against him, Julian continued to insist on his innocence. His lawyer argued that none of this evidence proved his guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. Throughout the investigation, detectives tried to extract a confession from Julian, but he steadfastly maintained his innocence. The pressure from authorities led him to feel embittered. He claimed that the persecution caused him to face difficulties in real life and to suffer from insults, unfounded accusations. Phone records revealed something intriguing. Julian's new girlfriend also tried to contact Clelia shortly before the murder. At first, she did not disclose any details as to why she tried to contact Clelia at all. However, in 2011, the girl spoke to detectives and made a rather dubious statement. According to her, she felt guilty that Clelia was dead. The reason for her fears stemmed from the fact that, as a close friend of Clelia, she was dating Julian. This clearly caused great discontent for his ex-girlfriend, who took every opportunity to contact him. On that fateful night, Julian's new girlfriend decided to act on her feelings. She did not like Clelia as such attention directed at the guy. She believed that this was the impetus for another conflict between the exes, which ended tragically. When the police received this statement, they were puzzled and decided to explore this new details. The application ended up at the station, and detectives tried to find out if it was possible that she was an accomplice. They insisted that Julian's new girlfriend may have unintentionally provoked the attack but did not pursue such a goal intentionally. According to her, she had been afraid to admit it because she feared her boyfriend's reaction. The neck of the deceased showed clear signs of strangulation, as if her throat had been squeezed with bare hands. Apparently, the victim could not have been killed in this way, so the criminal used a metal jack from the car. Although it was inconvenient, it quickly became the instrument that ended the innocent girl's life. The killer inflicted a large number of blows to her head and face, which proved fatal. The degree of cruelty was astounding. He broke her facial bones. The prosecutor addressed the jury, stating that leaving such a dangerous person at large was a crime. Despite the circumstantial nature of the evidence, the prosecution managed to prove the defendant's guilt. The prosecution's witnesses appeared scared as they recounted their experiences with the real Julian. The jury found Julian salely guilty of premeditated murder. As he left the courtroom, he turned to the victim's family and said something that sounded like a threat. From the very moment Julian found himself behind bars, he began writing endless appeals to challenge the sentence, insisting that he was a victim of bias and incompetence. Probably feeling his helplessness and unbearable situation, he even insulted one of the judges in writing, subsequently refusing to retract his comments, insisting he was a victim of governmental arbitrariness. However, all his requests were rejected. While in prison, he was involved in another incident related to his inability to control his aggression. Using a homemade sharpener, he threatened to kill one of the prison guards, whom he took hostage for several minutes. Julian was eventually overpowered and neutralized. Now, he remains behind bars. Hello everyone, today we will learn about another case. The case of Judy Southern. Sometimes, from the very beginning of an investigation, everything seems to work out. The Supreme Court might directly point to a criminal, but practice shows that they are not always correct. While they tried to connect one person to the crime, the real culprit was walking free. Judy lived in Manhattan, New York, USA. She was a young woman who worked part-time at the post office. She always focused more on family and children than on career success. However, she wanted to get an education. Therefore, after graduating from high school, She entered college and successfully graduated. During this period, she met Alan Southern. They began a relationship and then got married. Judy and Alan lived together for more than 6 years. They raised a child together. From the outside, it seemed that everything was fine in their family, until one day that destroyed the entire family idyll. On June 7, 2000, Judy was in a good mood as she went to work in the morning, delivering mail around the area. At about 3:30 p.m., she returned home and, as always, found no one there yet. Judy arrived first and was getting ready for her husband to return from work. She had a 5-year-old son who was visiting his grandparents at that time. The boy was supposed to return in the evening. Once inside, Judy immediately noticed a strange mess on the kitchen table and found a suspicious note. She remembered that no one was there when she left for work. No one from the household could have come and left a message. Her husband was at work and never showed up during the day. Judy didn't have time to figure it all out, began to read the note, which turned out to have quite disturbing content. While she scanned the piece of paper, a stranger came out of a dark room and headed towards her, weapon at the ready. Without warning, he attacked her twice. The first bullet missed, but the second hit Judy in the lower abdomen. She fell to the floor and screamed in pain, losing consciousness. When she came to her senses, the attacker was nowhere to be seen. Judy barely reached the phone and tried to call her husband for help. But the phone was not working. She wanted to get to her mobile phone but could not remember where she left it. Fearing that the stranger might still be nearby, Judy crawled to the front door and carefully opened it. She stood up, leaning against the wall, left the house. Judy tried to attract the attention of others to scare off the criminal. She was bleeding and managed to walk only a couple of meters before she fell down exhausted. She knew her husband would be finishing work soon and would be near the house. That is exactly what happened. A few minutes later, he drove up in his car and immediately noticed his wife lying on the ground near the house. Judy was covered in blood but still alive. Alan picked her up and placed her in the back seat of the car. Judy was weak but tried to tell him about the attack. She pointed to the courtyard, but her husband still didn't understand what she wanted. There was no time to figure it out. Alan realized his wife's condition could be critical. Driving towards the hospital, Alan dialed 911, informed them that he had found his wife wounded near their house and was heading to the hospital. He asked them to meet them on the way. Judy was still conscious, said that a man had attacked her. She mentioned the name like Barry several times, claiming he had set up an ambush. By the time Judy arrived at the hospital, she had already lost consciousness. Doctors urgently took her to the operating room, but she died right on the table before receiving help. Her twin sister, Trudy Smith, arrived at the medical center a few minutes later. Alan informed her about the attack. She hurried because she wanted to support her sister. However, she doesn't have enough time. When Trudy received the tragic news of her sister's death, she approached Alan and accused him of what had happened. Alan seemed embarrassed. Trudy vowed to bring him to justice. The police immediately spoke to Alan, who became the main suspect. Because, typically, the closest people are involved in such cases. From the very beginning, Alan referenced Judy's own words about the shooting and the ambush organized by a certain Barry. The problem was that he did not know a single person among her acquaintances by that name. Trudy also could not recall anyone by that name. Meanwhile, forensic experts examined the crime scene and managed to find a considerable amount of evidence confirming that someone had indeed set up an ambush there and spent a significant amount of time in the house waiting for the victim. Such persistence seemed to indicate hatred, anger, and a personal motive. This only confirmed to the detectives that the criminal should be sought among the victim's immediate surroundings. Nothing was stolen from the house, so the robbery theory was immediately excluded. Mysterious Barry had taken a shower, played video games, and even found an adult toy belonging to Judy. It is not known what he did with it or why he left it in a prominent place in the bedroom. It became why Judy could not call from home for help. It was impossible because the killer had cut the phone line. He clearly wanted to deprive the victim of any chance to survive, and it worked. Doctors were sure that with timely assistance, she could have been saved. Despite the fact that the shot did not kill her immediately and she was able to leave the house, there was no one to help her. Unfortunately, she had to wait for Alan to arrive for some time, during which she lost a lot of blood. The detectives discovered traces of Alan, her husband. He continued to insist that he had nothing to do with the ambush. There were cigarette butts lying everywhere in the house, suggesting that the killer had smoked more than a pack of cigarettes while waiting for Judy. During the investigation, it turned out that neither the victim herself nor her husband smoked that brand of cigarettes, although this was not strong evidence of his innocence. This became the first piece of evidence in favor of Alan's alibi. It was strange that the criminal had entered the house without breaking in. Alan believed that all the windows and doors should have been closed before he left for work, but the shooter could have escaped through the window, which was wide open. During the searches, Alan remembered that his wife sometimes left the kitchen window slightly open to air out the house. This change in testimony was perceived as a very alarming sign. Spent cartridges were found at the scene of the crime. The first bullet hit a wooden wall. Flax was collected for further examination, and the police tried their best to find the weapon, but it was all in vain. Now, locating it had become a priority. It was believed that Alan managed to dispose of the gun, and naturally, he did not confess to this. Everything seemed to be against Alan. He was the first to report the incident and had spent the last minutes of Judy's life with her. His entire car was covered in blood, as were his hands and clothes. When Alan's office was searched, even more suspicious evidence was found. A special device for recording calls was installed on the family's home phone. Thanks to it, Alan could listen to their conversations while at work, checking his suspicions. This immediately drew the attention of the authorities to Alan. This became a reason to increase pressure on him. The most curious piece of evidence was a note found at the scene, which appeared to be a suicide note, but not written by Judy or her husband. A new name also surfaced in this case, Jonathan. On the other hand, Alan and Judy had serious problems, which offered more reasons to commit a crime. The recordings of telephone conversations were linked to his attempts to catch his wife in infidelity. He planned to use all of this to gain an advantage in court during their pending divorce. As it turned out, both were unfaithful in their marriage. Alan had already had 2 mistresses, which Judy knew about. These affairs significantly contributed to the collapse of their marriage. At the time of the attack, Judy also had a lover. They contacted him, but the man's name was not Jonathan, and he did not appear to look like a killer from the beginning. All suspicions were removed when he provided a reliable alibi. Just 2 days before her death, Judy had called and complained about problems in the marriage, mentioning that they were even sleeping in different rooms, that for over a month, nothing had kept them together except for their 5-year-old son, Jacob. Judy had long wanted to file for divorce but saw how well her child was with his father and did not want to ruin that bond. Alan truly played a significant role in Jacob's life. However, this no longer mattered against the backdrop of constant quarrels. Judy could no longer tolerate the conflicts and was planning to file for divorce. It is obvious that this gave Alan more reasons for anger. He could have been jealous of her, fearing that he would lose his son or be forced to share custody or pay alimony. Trudy confirmed that they indeed had disputes about their child, and both wanted to obtain custody rights, making the divorce process expectedly difficult. Trudy, too, had reason to confront Alan with accusations right in the medical center. However, the most compelling and disturbing arguments for the investigation came from Judy's friends. Everyone knew that Judy had serious marital problems, but the situation was worse than it seemed. Judy had repeatedly stated that if something happened to her, Alan would definitely be guilty. The possibility of financial motives for the crime also emerged. As their relationship began to crumble, Alan could solve all his problems at once and gain some benefit. This turned out to be true because a life insurance policy for Judy was found during the investigation, with her husband and son as the beneficiaries. Of course, Alan denied everything. He was interrogated for hours, but he insisted that under no circumstances would he kill the mother of his child. He claimed that he loved his son too much to deprive him of the most valuable person in his son's life. According to the investigation, there was not enough evidence to bring charges. More material evidence was needed. At a minimum, it was necessary to wait for the results of all the examinations. Contrary to the detectives' expectations, doubts about the correctness of the choice of the main suspect arose with the first reports. The note found in the courtyard of the Southern house, identified as a suicide note, was signed by a certain Jonathan. However, the handwriting was not very legible, and the note itself was slightly contaminated with the blood of Judy. Complicating matters, it was clear that the note was addressed to a woman named Melanie and the letter was addressed to my wife, Melanie. At first, this confusion deepened because Melanie Southern did not exist, but there were other details in the letter, including an address that matched with Melanie Binney. This young woman lived at the location indicated in the note. She had a daughter and a husband named Jonathan Binney. The Binney family home was located approximately 5 kilometers from the ambush site where Judy was found. When the police checked Jonathan Binney in their database, it turned out that he fit the profile of the killer, as he had previously encountered problems with the law. Until recently, Jonathan had committed only minor offenses, but he was now under investigation for something far more serious. Shortly before Judy's death, he had abused his 3-month-old daughter. Initially, detectives believed that this note could have been written by Alan to mislead them and remove suspicion from himself. However, this clue needed proper analysis. In the suicide letter, Jonathan indicated that he wanted to leave this life voluntarily because he could not imagine being imprisoned for abusing a child. This all appeared suspicious when the detectives arrived at his house, where they found only his wife, Melanie. She admitted that he had not lived there since her statement about the child abuse case. Melanie was very angry with Jonathan. When she found out what happened to the Southern family, she was shocked because, in her opinion, Jonathan did not look like a killer, although she was no longer sure of anything. She was amazed at how close she had let a true madman, capable of such atrocities, into her life. She told the police where Jonathan could be, and the detectives arrived at the specified address. But even there, the suspect could not be found. Investigators contacted his close friends, but they also did not know where he could be. In the media, an alert was issued that a dangerous criminal was on the run, and they believed he could not have gone far. Additionally, considering the suicide note, they expected to find his lifeless body sooner. Tracking him down, the police used K-9 units with specially trained dogs and aerial support from police helicopters. The search took nearly a day until finally the dogs led the police to the basement of a house. There, Jonathan was found lying on the floor, shirtless, with 6 nicotine patches stuck to his chest. He was alive. The man told the police that he had attempted to take his own life by overdosing on nicotine. This was probably meant to convince everyone that he felt remorseful. Jonathan did not resist when he was arrested. He even seemed a little glad that it was all finally over. At the time of the crime, Jonathan Binney was 26 years old. His behavior raised doubts about his mental stability. Some suspected he might have mental issues. However, a psychiatric examination indicated that he was aware of his actions both during and after the crime. This led investigators to suspect that he was merely trying to elicit sympathy with his threats. Melanie provided detectives with writing samples that were analyzed by a handwriting expert. The expert found several significant characteristics that distinguished Jonathan's handwriting. He noted the similarity in the spelling of the lowercase g and f in the suicide note and in the samples. According to the analysis, there was almost a 100% probability that this letter was written by Jonathan himself. After this conclusion, the case against Alan began to collapse. Prior to Jonathan's arrest, the police had offered Alan a polygraph test. He agreed and passed with flying colors, which should have strengthened their confidence in his innocence, but they did not want to let him go. Alan was kept under suspicion until Jonathan confessed to attacking Judy, making it clear that Alan had no involvement in the crime. Alan was subsequently released. Another key piece of evidence was the DNA found on the toy in the house. The expert used dozens of filters to collect particles of saliva and skin from the killer, which also matched Jonathan's profile. This linked him to the crime scene. The day before Jonathan was arrested, the police found a 9mm handgun, a significant discovery. Despite a thorough search, they did not find this 9mm handgun registered to Alan. The gun was later confiscated and examined, but ballistics tests showed that it was not the weapon used to kill Judy. However, a dog team found another gun of the appropriate caliber in the woods near the house. Ballistics experts were now able to compare the bullets, cartridges, and guns. Tests were conducted. The markings on the bullets were then compared to objects from the scene of the massacre. The tests allowed investigators to prove that Judy was shot with this pistol. Fingerprints were found on the handle of the pistol, which also led to the arrest of a child abuser, Jonathan. During the search of Jonathan's house, police managed to find 9mm Cobra cartridges for a concealed carry pistol on the body under his clothing, as well as other evidence. All this confirmed that Jonathan was the weapon's owner. Melanie also told the police that he always carried a weapon with him, which he bought for self-defense. However, this had little effect on the situation with Alan. Even after that, he still looked suspicious. There were too many doubts against him because of the existing motive. Therefore, his status changed. It was now believed that he did not kill his wife with his own hands but became the mastermind behind the murder, using Jonathan as the executor. However, he refused to admit he didn't even know Jonathan. The theory that Alan hired Jonathan to kill his wife was also carefully investigated for a long time. The correspondence and calls were analyzed, but no connection leading Judy to Jonathan could be found. It seemed they were not acquainted at all. Against this backdrop, authorities tried to find at least some connection between the criminal and his victim in order to understand the motive for the attack. For a long time, it was thought this would help uncover Alan's involvement in the crime. It seemed suspicious that Judy called out a similar name before her death. Perhaps she really knew him or was trying to say something else, but her husband did not hear. The closest tie the police found was the period when Jonathan worked as a security guard at the library, where Judy occasionally borrowed books. They both had membership cards for the institution and exchanged pleasantries with each other. However, when questioned, the employees of the library could not remember any incidents involving Jonathan. The staff described Jonathan as a somewhat strange young man. While he worked as a security guard, he had no problems in his service record, at least none were known at his workplace. In fact, during this period, Jonathan had only minor offenses. When they questioned him about his job at the library, he could not recall anything that might connect him to Judy. Eventually, the detectives were forced to admit that this murder was a spontaneous act of aggression against an unknown person and a coincidence with Alan. All suspicions against Alan were dismissed. Jonathan was not familiar with Judy Southern. The choice of victim was random. He was merely driving around the city on his moped, looking for a suitable house to ambush. The Southern house seemed ideal to him, primarily because he spotted an open window that allowed for easy entry. Once inside the house, Jonathan clearly envisioned his actions. He had no specific target and was prepared to shoot whomever entered first, aiming to harm an innocent person. He smoked to ease his nerves. When it became he'd have to wait, he played video games and rummaged through the rooms. He never commented on Judy's abandoned adult toy. When Jonathan discovered that Judy had a husband and a 5-year-old son at the time, he claimed he would have shot any of them without discrimination or hesitation, even a child, if they had entered the house. Jonathan also confessed to abusing a 3-month-old child. Due to the ongoing investigation, he later told the authorities that he did not want to go to jail for child abuse, especially considering the familial ties and age of the victim. He was aware of how badly prisoners with such convictions were treated and described in detail the suffering caused by his fear of incarceration. Therefore, he sought a way to remedy the situation. Jonathan decided to go to jail as a murderer. He likely did not realize that he would be tried for both crimes and face 2 sentences, making it impossible to entirely hide his dark past. While in the ambush house, Jonathan altered his plan and decided to take his own life after committing the murder, so he didn't particularly care about leaving evidence. With these thoughts, he even wrote a suicide note. He spent several days behind bars and eventually told the police, without waiting for his lawyer, that he wanted to officially plead guilty to Judy's murder. Jonathan was not planning to deny his guilt regarding the abuse of a 3-month-old. His conscience was eating away at him, and he was ready to talk to detectives again. The entire local community was shocked by what had happened, especially Melanie, who had already suffered greatly. The media eagerly reported that a 3-month-old baby had been abused by her own father. Authorities feared public unrest and felt compelled to provide increased protection for the criminal. When Melanie learned that her husband was willing to kill any person, even a child, to avoid jail time for his shameful crime, she desperately wanted him imprisoned forever, or better yet, sentenced to death, so that this bloody chaos would end as soon as possible. Given the evidence collected, even without a confession, Jonathan Binney faced little chance of receiving a lenient sentence. He was found guilty of murdering Judy Southern and abusing a baby, receiving the highest punishment before being placed on death row. The court's decision elicited strong reactions from both the killer's wife and the family of the deceased, who finally breathed a sigh of relief and continued to raise their children. Jonathan's lawyer fought for a temporary reprieve, even managing to secure one at first, and subsequently signed a written agreement with the authorities stating that he would never again appeal the sentence if the death penalty were commuted to life imprisonment without the chance of parole. This agreement worked. Jonathan Binney is now serving a life sentence and remains behind bars. In the summer of 1990, in a sleepy Wisconsin town, Barrett Beck, an 18-year-old girl with musical dreams and aspirations, embarked on her first trip, a seemingly open door to the future, but just hours after leaving her family, Barrett disappeared in broad daylight. Her van was found with unusual markings, a torn red shirt, and an irreplaceable void in the hearts of her loved ones. When her body was found more than a month later, strangled and dumped in a deserted ditch, the small community was plunged into fear and obsession. Who extinguished that bright light? Who robbed a gentle, talented, and hopeful girl of her future? Why does a case that seems clear-cut become murky? When clues and suspects keep changing, and justice is delayed for decades. Barrett Beck was born on April 18, 1972, in Sturtevant, Wisconsin, a small town of about 7,000 people. She had a younger brother named Ben. Everyone remarked that Barrett was intelligent, talented, and had loved music since childhood. This passion grew even stronger as she turned 18. Barrett dreamed of pursuing a career in the creative field. In high school, her talent was evident. She played the violin, piano, and many other instruments, and sang very well. In the summer of 1989, she toured the United States with a Christian band. Besides, faith is an important part of her life. In high school, Barrett dated Curtis. He proposed, but she felt it was too early because she wanted to prioritize her studies and career. They agreed to take it slow, at least until they graduated from college, but they were still engaged and things were going well. Barrett had chosen a college and aimed to become financially independent from her parents. She was ambitious and didn't want the typical teen jobs. Even without a degree, she set her sights higher. Instead of working as a waitress or store clerk, she decided to seek a secretarial position at a construction company. She found the job by chance and felt confident because of her strong computer skills. She signed up for an interview and quickly impressed the manager. Despite not having any qualifications, she was hired, on the condition that she attend a 3-day computer training course for new employees. This was a job with good salary and promising opportunity, so she decided to join. The training was in Appleton, about 150 kilometers away. Barrett asked her family for help, but no one could accompany her. Her mother was recovering from an injury. Her father was working and caring for her mother. Her brother was too young, and her fiancé, Curtis, couldn't get time off. Barrett saw this as a challenge rather than a setback. She didn't want to miss the chance to land a better job and improve her finances. So she decided to make the trip alone. It would be her first long-distance trip without someone accompanying her, and she was understandably nervous. Barrett prepared carefully for the seminar scheduled for July 17, 1990. She packed meticulously, made a list of essentials, and got her two-tone 1987 phone ready, including adding a roof rack. It was a popular, comfortable, and practical vehicle at the time. On July 17, she woke early, double-checked everything, said goodbye to her family, and drove to Curtis's house to see him before leaving town. After spending some time together, she set off. Her first stop was in Fond du Lac, about 100 kilometers away. She visited a large shopping center, bought cosmetics and travel items, including a whitening kit, and left the receipt in her van. This was around 11 o'clock a.m. Trouble began when she didn't arrive in Appleton at the scheduled time. The supervisor who had interviewed her and was expecting her at the training session noticed her absence. At first, she assumed Barrett was simply running late. Since cell phones were not common at the time, the supervisor could not contact Barrett directly, so she called the phone number Barrett had provided to her family. When the supervisor contacted Barrett's parents, they were confused and worried. They said they had seen her off early that morning and were waiting for her to call upon arrival. They assumed her silence was due to travel delays or a busy schedule, not realizing something more serious might have happened. Barrett's mother, Diane, was recovering from a snowmobile accident and couldn't go looking for her herself, but she was extremely worried and couldn't sit still. She called Barrett's boyfriend, Curtis, and learned that Barrett had left him some time ago. She then contacted all of Barrett's friends, but none knew where she was. Barrett's father decided to act. He put Diane in the car and drove to Appleton. There, he confirmed that Barrett had never arrived and hadn't checked into the hotel room he'd reserved for her. At that point, it was clear something was wrong. The parents knew that Barrett was a responsible person, took her job very seriously, and was on her way to an important event that had a significant impact on her future. They immediately started searching and called the police. The police do not use the excuse of waiting 24 hours. They recognized the seriousness of the situation and acted immediately. They organized multiple search parties. The number of volunteers quickly increased. Barrett's family was devastated and offered a substantial reward for information, $75,000. They hoped it would help bring her home alive. Instead, it triggered a flood of false tips. Rumors spread, calls poured in, and investigators lost precious time following leads that went nowhere. On July 19, 2 days after the search began, Barrett's travel-converted van was found abandoned in a shopping center parking lot near the store where she had last been seen in Fond du Lac. Multiple witnesses said the van hadn't been there on July 17 or 18. Patrols who had driven by several times also reported seeing nothing unusual earlier. An inspection of the van revealed troubling details. The odometer showed more than 500 kilometers, even though the trip to Fond du Lac should have been around 100. Inside, officers found empty cigarette packs, numerous wrappers, and loose tobacco. Even though Barrett didn't smoke, about 70 items were collected from the vehicle, many of which the family could not identify and insisted did not belong to her. Barrett herself was missing, and there were no clues pointing to her whereabouts. There were, however, ominous signs. Her red shirt, the one she planned to wear to the seminar and considered a lucky charm, was found in the van. It was badly damaged. A large section had been torn away, and the missing piece was not found in or around the vehicle. Detectives began to fear that Barrett's parents might never see their daughter alive again. Despite a careful analysis of the evidence, the investigation stalled. Weeks passed with no breakthroughs. Then, 5 weeks after Barrett went missing, on August 22, a farmer near Waupun noticed something in a roadside ditch while driving his tractor to a nearby field. He stopped to investigate and discovered a severely decomposed human body. The August heat, intense sun, and insect activity had accelerated decomposition, and bones were beginning to show, He immediately called law enforcement. Police at the scene could learn little from the remains. So they ordered laboratory tests and brought in specialists. Entomologists studied the insects present and determined the victim had been dead for over a month. They also concluded the victim was a young woman, about 17 to 20 years old. This wasn't enough to identify her definitively, but it did narrow the search. Reviewing local missing person reports reduced the possibilities to a few names, including 18-year-old Berit Beck. The victim showed multiple signs of strangulation on her neck. She was blindfolded, and there were no cuts or gunshot wounds. So the medical examiner determined the cause of death to be strangulation. Notably, the blindfold was a red rag. Forensic analysis confirmed the fabric matched a torn shirt found in Berit's abandoned car. Combined with dental records, this evidence positively identified the body as 18 years old, Berit Beck. When the police searching for her were notified, the case was officially reclassified as a homicide. The body was found nude except for socks, suggesting possible abuse. However, the state of decomposition made it impossible to confirm or disprove this hypothesis. No bodily fluids could be recovered. A search of the area near the body turned up some of Berit's personal items, but several pieces of jewelry were missing. Her gold ring, a gift from her boyfriend, and her wristwatch were gone. The car was also missing a radio and radar detector. It was suspected the killer took them either to sell or to mislead investigators. After a thorough examination of the car, police found the ring under the floor mat on the driver's side. The rest of the items were still missing. Investigators compiled detailed descriptions of the missing items and canvas pawn shops near where the body was found and in nearby suburbs. New leads emerged. No one recognized the items. The investigation pressed on. The geography complicated matters. The distance between the body and the abandoned van spanned tens of kilometers. Yet the van's high mileage suggested the killer drove much farther. No fingerprints were found on the steering wheel or gear shift. They had been wiped clean, indicating the killer deliberately removed traces. Other evidence left in the van might have contained the killer's DNA, but attempts to develop a profile failed. The samples were too limited for 1,990 seconds forensic methods. Eventually, the county sheriff took personal charge of the case. He was struck by the van's mileage and tried to reconstruct Berit's movements. The van was bright and outfitted with extra equipment, making it theoretically noticeable, but the model was common. Moreover, traffic camera systems were hardly common at the time, so this line of investigation reached a dead end. The killer had the van for several days, drove it extensively, yet avoided police detection. Given the calculated behavior and method of murder, investigators considered whether the killer might have known Berit. Heiress' social circle, however, consisted of respectable people. Berit was intelligent, law-abiding, and had no bad habits. The last person to see her alive was her boyfriend, Curtis, so he was scrutinized, more from a lack of other leads than real suspicion. Curtis immediately maintained his innocence, cooperated fully, and took a polygraph. He was quickly cleared. He had a strong alibi, having remained in the city and at work for the days following his meeting with Berit. He could not have traveled the roughly 500 kilometers associated with her disappearance. Investigators then turned to men with criminal records living in Fond du Lac at the time. Their prime suspect became a local career criminal named Craig Rohn, known in criminal circles as Psycho for his explosive temper and poor impulse control. The erratic young man had a lengthy criminal record. Craig drew law enforcement's attention because he was known for stealing cars and committing armed robberies. While Berit wasn't physically assaulted, her car was used for an extended period. Around the time Berit drove to a work event, Craig was seen in the Fond du Lac area. In the winter of 1991, detectives searched Craig's property under a warrant. From the start, Craig was uncooperative. He denied any involvement in the car theft and Berit's death, refused to provide an alibi, and refused to take a polygraph test. Craig insisted the investigation was a setup and that he was being made a scapegoat. Still, searches of his home and car turned up no evidence linking him to the crimes. Despite this, detectives remained convinced of his guilt and focused on building a case against him. Police records show that Craig had serious behavioral problems from his teenage years, including running away from home, taking banned substances, and getting involved in the underworld. He dropped out of school, began stealing cars, and later added robberies to his offenses. Eventually, he received his first prison sentence by the 1,990 seconds. Craig had a lengthy rap sheet and multiple stints in prison. He had a reputation as a career criminal who lived off illegal activity. People close to him believed he was capable of any crime, even murder. However, he had no known history of violence against women. Investigators still considered him dangerous and suspected he could kill without remorse. So they tried to link him to Barit's disappearance. They believed the lack of evidence was due to his experience. He knew what to eliminate and how to avoid leaving traces. There were reasons for suspicion. Around the time of Barit's abduction, Craig was staying at a motel near the Fond du Lac shopping center. Still, the evidence was circumstantial, and prosecutors couldn't charge him with Barit's murder. A short time later, Craig was arrested on unrelated charges and sent to federal prison. This eased concerns about public safety while the investigation continued. A police informant, Tim Amundsen, then deepened suspicion by claiming Craig had confessed to the murder and even shown him Barit's body. According to Tim, the body was left in the stolen van for nearly a day before Craig disposed of it outside the city. Yet the longer detectives worked the case, the clearer it became. There was no solid evidence tying Craig to the crime. They decided not to prosecute him in connection with Barit's murder. That decision proved sound. Tim later recanted, admitting he had fabricated the story. Tim said he despised Craig and wanted him imprisoned long-term to prevent future harm. Tim's account was based on details from detectives and TV reports. He even failed a polygraph, confirming he was lying. Detectives then reviewed physical evidence and found 12 fingerprints on items in Barit's car. The tests showed that they did not belong to Barit or anyone close to her, and they did not match against police databases. Importantly, they did not match Craig either. Even after Craig was imprisoned on unrelated charges, investigators kept monitoring him. Despite no matching fingerprints, detectives have not given up on the theory that he killed Barit. For years, there were no leads. Only in 2013 did the 1990 case come back to life, when a new cold case team was formed. A new detective joined the team and was given the first task: to collect all of Barit Beck's documents and artifacts from the archives, digitize them, and review them. In February 2014, the investigation finally produced a breakthrough. An analyst at the Wisconsin State Crime Lab re-examined evidence from the van and discovered 9 previously unidentified fingerprints on 5 items, including a Burger King cup. In addition, police found a manual from the company where Barit was planning to work, a teeth whitening kit she had purchased at a Fond du Lac supermarket, and cigarette and candy wrappers. All were sent for analysis and compared to a database. The initial hope was slim, but then the results came. All 9 fingerprints belonged to the same person in the database: Dennis Brantner, 61, a truck driver in Kenosha. Just before Barit went missing, he repaired the stove in her family's home, thus linking him to the family and possibly to she. Detectives then reviewed his criminal history. His first arrest was in 1994 for assaulting, kidnapping, and beating his second wife. By then, many people had already noticed his volatile, manipulative behavior toward women. One co-worker even remembered Dennis saying he wanted to kidnap, abuse, and kill a woman. With this information, detectives searched his Kenosha home in 2014 with a search warrant, hoping to find missing items from Barit's truck that the killer may have kept as trophies. Nothing from the van was found, which was not surprising given the time that had passed. However, investigators seized a computer, storage devices, a photo album, and several discs for analysis. Later that year, Dennis was brought in for questioning. He initially claimed he didn't know who Barrett was and insisted he was innocent. When informed that his fingerprints matched evidence from the van, his demeanor changed. He immediately said he hadn't killed her, suggesting he knew more than he admitted. Despite this, the first interview did not yield a confession, and he was released. His erratic behavior only deepened investigators' suspicions, but they still needed physical evidence. On March 27, 2015, Dennis was arrested and charged with first-degree murder in the death of Barrett Beck, drawing national attention. Barrett's family remained skeptical. For 25 years, his name had never been mentioned as a suspect. Barrett's family knew him, believed he was harmless and unlikely to attack Barrett. They also believed the police had the wrong man. Nevertheless, the trial began in June 2016. As the trial progressed, Dennis's parents and brother became increasingly convinced that he was guilty. The prosecution relied on fingerprints, the only direct evidence, and a slew of circumstantial evidence, including the suspect's cigarettes and cigarette butts found in the abandoned truck. They also presented witness statements and accounts of the man's disturbing past behavior, suggesting a pattern of cruelty and control toward women. The defense countered that the case was weak and largely circumstantial, emphasizing omitted details, most notably that some DNA samples from the truck did not match Dennis. The defense sought to introduce a previous suspect, Craig Crone, but the judge barred any mention of him during the hearing. Barrett's family and her boyfriend, Curtis, testified emotionally about their lives since her murder. Still, after 3 weeks of testimony, the jury could not reach a verdict, and a mistrial was declared. A retrial was ordered in January 2017. At the retrial, the evidence was largely unchanged, and both sides appeared to have a viable path to victory. On his attorney's advice, Dennis pleaded guilty to negligent homicide in February 2018, though he refused to provide full details to substantiate his account. At the time, Dennis was 64. Sentencing followed state laws from the 1,990 seconds, which capped the penalty at 10 years. He received the maximum on March 1, 2018. He had already served 3 years in pretrial detention, which counted toward his sentence, and he remained eligible for parole. In the best case, he could be released around age 75. He is currently incarcerated. After the sentencing, Barrett's family spoke to the press, expressing deep dissatisfaction. They noted that the original charges could have carried more than 5 years and felt the final sentence was too lenient. They said they had hoped this dangerous predator would spend the rest of his life in prison. As it stands, Dennis could eventually regain his freedom and, in their view, pose a risk to others. On the night of February 1, 1986, 2 young women, Jennifer Dewey and Michelle Xavier, disappeared while driving home from Fremont, California. They had been best friends since high school, growing up together, working together, and sharing every moment of their 20s. Just hours after leaving a party, they were found dead, naked, on the side of a remote Mill Creek road. Their bodies were cold, their clothes were torn, and a pink jacket was the only significant clue left at the scene. The deaths of the 2 women shocked the Fremont community. In a place that had been peaceful, where violence had previously seemed like a regular on the evening news. Family, friends, and the entire city were in shock as 2 well-liked people became victims of a brutal crime. More than 3 decades later, the case went cold, until a DNA test revealed a name, David Misch, a serial killer who terrorized California in the 1,980 seconds. What police discovered next not only rekindled a forgotten double murder case, but also opened up a chain of chilling truths about a predator who had been hiding in plain sight for years. Jennifer Dewey and Michelle Xavier met in high school and quickly became best friends. They graduated in 1984 and enrolled in the same college. Although a year apart in age, they were inseparable. During college, they both lived with their parents, had boyfriends, and met regularly. Even though they have boyfriends, these two friends still spend most of their free time together. Jennifer was born on December 30, 1965, and was one of 6 children. By age 20, she worked in the cosmetics department of a store in Fremont, California, a city of about 200,000 people. Her best friend, Michelle Xavier, was born on June 14, 1966, and had only one younger brother. When she was 19, Michelle worked at a department store. In charge of the children's clothing section, people often remarked on how alike they looked, frequently mistaking them for sisters. On Saturday, February 1, 1986, Jennifer and Michelle went to a party with their boyfriends in a nearby suburb. Bored, the girls left around 8 p.m. to head back to Fremont. While their boyfriends stayed behind, they planned to drive about 20 minutes and continue their evening in the city rather than go straight home. They stopped at a friend's house, ordered pizza, watched a movie, and hung out. Later, driving Jennifer's convertible, they spotted their boyfriends in a supermarket parking lot. They pulled in, chatted for a while, and then parted ways. Jennifer mentioned she wanted to grab pizza before going home. She and Michelle left the parking lot at about 2:23 a.m. That was the last time they were seen alive, around 12:30 a.m. On Sunday, February 2, a man riding a motorbike on a narrow road called Mill Creek in the suburbs spotted a suspicious object. When he returned to check, he discovered the nude bodies of 2 young women. Terrified, he called the police. The only clothing found nearby was a pink coat. When the police arrived, they found that the killer had made no attempt to hide the body and likely killed them on the spot, then left, initially without any identifying information. The body was taken for identification and autopsy. Forensics and investigators combed the remote road for evidence. That night, Jennifer's mother had expected her home by midnight. She left the porch light on and went to bed, assuming late nights were not unusual for her adult daughter. By 9 o'clock she realized Jennifer still hadn't returned. Thinking Jennifer might have spent the night with Michelle, she called Michelle's home, only to learn Michelle hadn't come home either. Both families initially assumed the girls were with their boyfriends. The parents remained relatively calm until 1 p.m. when Jennifer's employer called to ask why she'd missed her shift, something she had never done. Alarmed, Jennifer's mother contacted Michelle's family again. They, too, had received calls about Michelle missing work. Together, the families filed missing persons reports. Police, aware of the 2 unidentified bodies, I suspected a connection. Their suspicions grew when Jennifer's parents said she'd been wearing a pink coat, matching the one found at the scene. Later that day, February 2, officers located Jennifer's convertible parked behind a gas station near the shopping center where she worked. The car had no keys or personal items that could help identify the victims, but the license plate confirmed it was Jennifer's vehicle. Police contacted the mall staff, the nearby hotel owner, and the gas station owner to gather information. The gas station owner said a car suddenly appeared behind the building at 11:15 p.m. 2 women got out and lingered near it, but he didn't see them leave. Later, an employee said that at 11:20 p.m., when he went out to smoke, he did not see any cars near the gas station. He also personally knew both Jennifer and Michelle. Witnesses suggested the abduction took no more than 5 minutes. There was a bar nearby, but Jennifer and Michelle, being under 21, could not have gone inside. Nevertheless, the kidnapper may have appeared at the bar. so the staff and the owner were also questioned. But no one noticed anything unusual. On February 5, 1986, a memorial service was held for Jennifer and Michelle, who seemed inseparable in life and died together. More than 1,000 people attended. They were buried on February 6. That same day, a vote approved a $5,000 reward for information leading to the arrest of whoever was responsible for Jennifer and Michelle's deaths. Beginning February 7, more details about the attack were released. Previously, police had revealed almost nothing. Authorities then disclosed that one victim had been fatally slashed with a bladed weapon and the other had been shot. On February 13, a photo was released, taken just hours before the murder, showing Jennifer and Michelle together for the last time. Public interest remained high. After the release of information and photographs, about 100 people came forward, but unfortunately all provided false or worthless leads. By then, the city council had increased the reward to $6,000. In March, Michelle's cousin organized a fundraiser to expand the reward, including a benefit concert. By April, the fund had reached $35,000. A bulletin with pictures of Jennifer and Michelle was released, compiling all the official information released by the authorities. Meanwhile, detectives were still actively investigating and noted several similar cases in the area in 1983 to 1984, but found no direct connection with the deaths of two young girls, Jennifer and Michelle. Many people suspect this is a serial killer. Those fears grew when another victim, 20 years old Dana Lee, was found in early March 1987. She had last been seen on December 29, 1986, at a gas station near where Jennifer's car had been found. Investigators eventually caught Dana's killer, but could not connect him to the double murder of Michelle and Jennifer. Leads dried up, and suspects with solid alibis were eliminated. The case stalled. For years, no new information emerged. Similar cases had occurred in the area before the 1,990 seconds, but after investigation, no connection to Jennifer and Michelle's case could be found. However, police periodically reviewed and re-examined the case. New forensic techniques brought renewed hope. In 2001, investigators found skin cells under Jennifer's fingernails. They developed a DNA profile of the attacker and uploaded it to a law enforcement database, but it produced no matches. In 2016, the Fremont Police Department created a cold case unit that reopened Jennifer and Michelle's case. Detectives retested old DNA evidence using updated databases and found a match to David Misch, whose DNA had been uploaded in 2003. DNA from under a victim's fingernails matched David's DNA. That evidence was collected in 2001, 2 years before his profile entered the database. David had been convicted of murder in 1989 and was serving a life sentence in the early 2000s. Notably, when his DNA was first compared to evidence from Jennifer and Michelle's case in 2003, it already showed a match. Detectives interviewed David. He said he tried to help Jennifer and Michelle. He said he was at a gas station when he saw two men dragging Jennifer behind a building. He rushed over, realized there were two victims, and tried to intervene. According to him, the men forced both girls into a car and fled. He said he was hit in the face and disoriented, and Jennifer may have scratched him while trying to escape, which could explain the DNA under her fingernails. A week later, detectives asked David to tell the story again. David refused, so the account was never publicly released. However, the interview is still important because he admits to being with Jennifer and Michelle during their kidnapping. He was not questioned again for 14 years. In August 2017, the case unit found a DNA match for David in the database. They also interviewed Jennifer and Michelle's family again. On September 8, 2017, they met with David, who repeated his 2003 story. On March 2, 2018, prosecutors charged David with 2 counts of first-degree murder and kidnapping. He remained in county custody. The case subsequently faced numerous delays, prison transfers, administrative issues, and additional charges, including the 1988 kidnapping. As a result, David did not appear in court until October 21, 2024. The trial lasted 6 weeks and revealed disturbing details previously kept from the public. Prosecutors stated that Michelle was attacked with a knife and died from a deep throat wound that caused her to bleed out within minutes. Jennifer was shot 3 times in the back, suggesting she tried to flee. Letters and numbers found on Michelle's palm were identified as a license plate. A reinvestigation showed it matched a motorcycle registered to David Misch in the 1,980 seconds. Detectives in the original investigation did not recognize the markings and likely searched for a car owner instead of a motorcyclist. Blood was found in Michelle's convertible. Many previously undisclosed details related to Jennifer and Michelle's clothes and belongings. They were not lost, but were found near the bodies. T-shirts, sweatshirts, pants, and underwear were scattered, some hanging from tree branches and from barbed wire along the roadside fence. The bodies were originally discovered by a county judge and his wife as they drove by. The judge has since passed away, but his 90-year-old wife testified at the trial, describing a horrific scene with blood and torn clothing everywhere, as if something brutal had taken place. David Misch testified in his own defense, despite his lawyer's warnings. He then changed his story dramatically. He claimed that he was a banned substance dealer and said that Jennifer and Michelle approached him on the night of the kidnapping. He first met Jennifer at a shopping mall shortly before the murder and gave her a number to buy a banned substance. According to him, she repeatedly called to purchase marijuana for herself, her friend, and her boyfriend. David said they later met at a gas station at night, talked for a few minutes, and shared a cigarette. He argued that this is how his DNA ended up under Jennifer's fingernails. After selling the banned substance, he said that he drove away and didn't know what happened next. This major shift in his account only deepened suspicion. He showed no remorse and even hummed a tune in court. On December 19, 2024, David refused to attend the sentencing hearing. He was convicted and faces life imprisonment. The maximum sentence is expected to be handed down on January 21, 2025. However, the case does not end there. Advances in forensic analysis link David to several other violent crimes previously left unsolved. At 3:00 p.m. on December 7, 1989, Margaret Ball, 36, was found dead on the living room floor. She lived with her 11-year-old daughter, who discovered her mother's death. Margaret had been severely beaten and stabbed multiple times in the chest and abdomen. David was her neighbor. They had been on friendly terms, and he sometimes ran errands for her for money. Over time, he developed a romantic interest, which he rejected. After she refused, he became aggressive and threatening, and she began avoiding him. After the murder, Margaret's 1981 Mazda, along with her wallet, food stamps, and $85, were missing. A crucial clue. The next morning, police arrested David after spotting him driving a car with Margaret's license plate. His father testified that on the day Margaret was found dead, he came home and confessed, saying that he had attacked her while under the influence of a banned substance, robbed her, and stolen her car. At the trial, David stated that initially Margaret agreed to be intimate with him, but later changed her mind, which led him to hit her. He said she pulled a knife. A struggle ensued, and he stabbed her in a rage. The trial ended in 1990, and David was convicted and sentenced to life in prison. But that was only part of his string of crimes. While the Jennifer and Michelle cases were still pending, another complaint arose. David was suspected of being involved in the kidnapping of 9-year-old Michaela Garricht, a case that had made headlines. Her disappearance drew national attention, with extensive media coverage. In September 2020, athlete Joe Montana publicly suggested David Misch might also have been involved in the murder of his wife, who was found dead in their Malibu home. An event also dated to 1988, 3 months after Michaela's abduction. On December 21, 2020, David was indicted for kidnapping Michaela after investigators found partial fingerprints on the scooter Michaela was riding. He is believed to have lived nearby at the time, and evidence matched his fingerprints. Michaela Garrick was born on January 24, 1979, the middle of 3 children. Her family moved to Hayward in 1987. Soon after, Michaela knocked on a neighbor's door, hoping to make a new friend. That's how she met Katrina. They became best friends, even dressing alike and pretending to be twins. Their story parallels that of Jennifer and Michelle, who were also close friends and later became victims of David. On November 19, 1988, Michaela spent the day with Katrina. They went to a store to buy candy and soda. Riding there on a scooter Michaela had borrowed from her brother. After shopping, they started home. After a few hundred meters, they remembered that they had left their scooter in the parking lot. So they turned back. It wasn't where they had left it. After looking around, they found it lying on the ground in a more secluded part of the lot. As Michaela bent down to pick it up, a man who appeared to be homeless suddenly grabbed her. Katrina described him as unkempt and dirty, fair-skinned, with long, untrimmed hair. She saw him drag Michaela into a car and drive away. She ran into the store for help, and an employee called the police. The only immediate lead was her description of the abductor. Katrina provided information and led police to the tire tracks where the car had been parked. She described the car but couldn't see the license plate, limiting the usefulness of the tip. The family mobilized immediately. In the first week alone, about 40,000 flyers were distributed. Despite this, the case went cold for years. Police received no solid leads. Even after press conferences, Hayward officers interviewed numerous men with histories of kidnappings and violent offenses, but none confessed. Several suspects were identified, yet investigations showed they could not have committed the crime. For decades, Michaela's family hoped she was alive. Though the odds were slim, they resisted believing the worst. When Michaela's mother was told a primary suspect had been identified, she declined to meet him. She thanked the investigators and said she had long accepted her daughter's death, only hoping to know where she was. Tragically, Michaela's mother died in 2022 without that answer. At the time, David was still awaiting trial for Michaela's kidnapping. David's criminal history began at age 16. In 1977, he broke into a neighbor's house and attacked the housekeeper, threatening her with a knife and attempting to strangle her. She managed to fight him off and escape. He was arrested, adjudicated as a juvenile, served a short sentence, and was released on parole. In 1979, he broke into another neighbor's home and threatened a mother and her 2 children. She talked him down, and he left without harming them. After his arrest, he was committed to a psychiatric hospital. In September 1981, he was released after experts deemed him no longer a threat. The assessment proved wrong. In June 1982, he attacked and beat an exchange student. While the girl was unconscious, he tried to drag her into the car, but a passerby intervened and he fled. Thanks to the witness's account, David was arrested and convicted. He was sentenced to 4 years in prison. By late 1985, he was released. He got a job and appeared to be attempting a normal life. He started a relationship, and his girlfriend became pregnant. On February 1, 1986, he murdered Jennifer and Michelle. In November 1987, his girlfriend gave birth, but the baby died at 3 months old. The death was ruled natural causes. In February 1988, David was imprisoned for theft and released a few months later. In November 1988, he kidnapped Michaela. In April 1989, he was again incarcerated for theft. On December 7, 1989, he murdered Margaret Ball. Michaela Garrick's kidnapping trial began in January 2023. Her friend Katrina testified as a witness. As soon as Katrina saw David, the man who kidnapped her best friend Michaela, she immediately recognized him and has been tormented by self-blame ever since. For 10 years after Michaela's disappearance, Katrina continued to buy her birthday presents. David's lawyer argued there was no proof Michaela had died and suggested she might have run away. However, given Katrina's eyewitness account of the abduction, the runaway theory was not considered credible. David has never admitted guilt, shown remorse, or provided any details about what happened to Michaela. The trial remains ongoing, and Michaela's body has not been found. On a peaceful autumn day in November 2004, in Tampa, Florida, a horrific tragedy occurred, claiming the life of Katrina Ann Katie Froschla, a beautiful, talented, and passionate 25-year-old woman. She disappeared without a trace while working in the disaster area left by a major hurricane season. A few days later, her body was found. She had been brutally beaten with a pipe and then thrown into the river to conceal the crime. Who killed her, and why? Katrina Ann Katie Froschla was born on October 1, 1979, in Fort Collins, Colorado, United States, the eldest child and the only daughter in her family. Her mother was a nurse, and her father, an attorney who later became a prosecutor. His career required frequent relocations. Shortly after Katie's birth, the family moved to Lakewood, Colorado, before eventually settling across the country in Tierra Verde, Florida, a peaceful, picturesque community by the water. Katie attended high school there, quickly joined the swim team, showing strong athletic ability. In addition to swimming, she loved softball and basketball. At home, she enjoyed cooking and adored cats. Everyone who knew her could attest to her deep affection for them. She couldn't pass one without stopping to give it attention. In 1998, Katie graduated from high school and enrolled at Florida State University. 4 years later, she earned a bachelor's degree in finance and risk management, insurance, a field she genuinely loved. Always active, she became a member of the Kappa Alpha Theta sorority, a prestigious organization she was proud to represent. After graduating in 2002, Katie began working for Florida Farm Bureau Insurance as a claims adjuster. She quickly became known for her professionalism and compassion. Her job required her to accept and process insurance claims, which often included on-site inspections of damaged properties. Around 2 years before earning her degree, Katie began dating a young man. But romance wasn't her priority. Although they dated for 4 years, the relationship eventually ended in 2004. By the summer of that year, Katie was a 25-year-old single woman. Focused fully on her career, it was an incredibly demanding time for insurance professionals. 4 major hurricanes, Charlie, Francis, Ivan, and Jeannie, struck Florida within 6 weeks, causing more than $1 billion in damage. Insurance companies were overwhelmed, and adjusters like Katie had a crushing workload that stretched on for months. For Katie, this meant countless visits to clients' homes to assess structural damage and determine compensation. Friday, November 12, 2004, started out like any other workday. She was scheduled to inspect a rental property to evaluate roof damage. Her manager told her the tenant might not be home. But it didn't matter. She didn't need to enter the house. The damage could be assessed from the street. Around noon, Katie's mother, Jeffrey, expected her usual call. They typically spoke several times a day, chatting about little things, family matters, daily life, or simply to check in. But that day was different. Katie did not call. When her mother phoned her, there was no answer. She knew Katie was in the middle of work, so she assumed she was just busy and thought little of it at first. But the hours passed, and Katie never called back. Something completely out of character. Her mom tried to brush off her growing concern, telling herself that Katie must be exhausted after weeks of hurricane-related fieldwork. Or perhaps she had turned off her phone to focus on inspections. As the night went on and calls continued to go unanswered, her mother grew increasingly uneasy. She thought perhaps Katie had forgotten her cell phone at home. When the dinner hour came and passed with still no response, she called Emmy, one of Katie's closest friends, the only friend whose number she had. Emmy delivered troubling news. Katie didn't show up for dinner as planned. Her co-workers had tried calling as well. With no success, panic was beginning to take shape. Emmy, just as alarmed, immediately offered to help search for her. She and Katie were extremely close. Close enough that Emmy had a spare key to Katie's apartment. Emmy headed there to check on things. Katie's car wasn't in the driveway. When Emmy knocked on the door, no one answered, so she used her key. After checking the rooms, she didn't notice anything suspicious, except that Katie's cat's bowl was empty, indicating it hadn't been filled for quite some time. Caring for her pets was a top priority for Katie, so it was unusual for her to neglect feeding the cat. There was no new information until the next morning. So Katie's family decided to report her missing to law enforcement. The police immediately took the matter seriously and launched a search operation. A bulletin was issued with all the details describing not only Katie but also her car. By this point, it became clear that the maroon Chevrolet Impala was also missing. Detectives carefully examined Katie's apartment. They found no signs of forced entry, so they surmised she was either attacked by someone she knew, to whom she opened the door, or perhaps she had left on her own accord. They checked on her ex-boyfriend, as Katie's friends had heard about problems in their relationship. Several witnesses recalled that Katie's ex-boyfriend was against the breakup and had repeatedly shown up at places she frequented. However, no formal allegations of stalking had been made. When investigators spoke with the ex-boyfriend, he admitted to making several attempts to rekindle their relationship, but insisted those attempts had ceased long before her disappearance. This line of inquiry was abandoned when he provided a confirmed alibi. Reconstructing the sequence of events, it was discovered that Katie's friends and colleagues last saw her just before she was scheduled to go to a house to assess the extent of the damage. The job was scheduled for noon and wasn't expected to last more than an hour. After that, she didn't contact anyone again. Detectives contacted the insurance agency and easily obtained the address of a house in Tampa. In a high-crime neighborhood, this was a glaring red flag, as it was a picturesque but rather dangerous location. According to Emmy, when Katie was in the area near the property, she got lost and called her for directions. The two friends continued talking until Katie arrived at the house. Emmy hadn't heard anything suspicious, at least until her friend announced she'd found the house and that a tall, young man was heading her way. Afterward, they said goodbye, and she hung up. It seemed like something bad could have happened to Katie here, and this lead needed to be followed up. When law enforcement arrived at the address, they found Jason Funk and Pamela Hintz inside. It was a young couple who had recently moved in and were now living in the house. They said they hadn't seen any woman matching Katie's description, nor had they seen her car. According to Jason, they had moved into the house just 3 days before Katie's disappearance, but only moved their belongings in the day before detectives arrived. From their words, it seemed like no one had been there the day Katie arrived. Curiously, Jason and Pamela denied any roof damage. They'd never discussed the matter with the landlords. They hadn't realized an insurance adjuster was supposed to come and assess the situation. It all sounded odd. Katie's family continued their own impromptu investigation. Led by her father, a prosecutor, they began combing the area around the house where she was last seen. Katie's car was found in a parking lot about a kilometer away. Her parents immediately noticed that the car was unlocked and the keys were in the ignition. This could be seen as a warning sign. Katie's parents contacted the police to report the vehicle. The police found a crucial piece of evidence: her wallet. All cash and bank cards were missing. It was clear something sinister had happened in the car. So forensic experts arrived to conduct a thorough inspection and collect evidence. They found an empty document envelope in the door compartment. There were no bloodstains or obvious sources of DNA that could be linked to anyone else inside the car. Investigators hypothesized that the attack on Katie could have occurred elsewhere, and the car was moved to the parking lot to conceal the crime. If this were the case, the perpetrator would have left fingerprints on the steering wheel while driving the car. This theory proved correct. 2 sets of fingerprints were found on the steering wheel. One belonged to Katie, and the other was too small, incomplete, and partially smudged. A full analysis was required to determine the identity. Law enforcement began interviewing nearby workers who might have witnessed the car being left in the parking lot. A local cleaner confirmed that he saw a man abandoning the car early in the morning. This detail attracted his attention because there were no other cars parked there yet. After leaving the car, the man simply walked down the street, and no one had touched the car since. The witness did not see any passengers or other individuals with him. The driver was alone. The witness provided a good description of the suspect, allowing authorities to obtain a reasonably detailed profile. Given the time frame, the suspect likely didn't have much time to drive around the area. Therefore, authorities decided to thoroughly search the area between the house where Katie was last seen and the parking lot where her car was found. The most obvious place to hide the body between these 2 points is the Hillsborough River, which flowed just 100 meters from the house Katie was supposed to be inspecting. A search of the river area was initiated. As it was getting dark, one of the officers spotted something light-colored on the surface of the water. He shone his flashlight and found a bra a few meters from the riverbank. When shown the item, Katie's mother recognized it as her daughter's underwear. From that moment on, the investigation was confirmed to be on the right track. The next morning, search teams redoubled their efforts. Less than an hour later, in daylight, Katie's body was discovered. Identification was straightforward. She had been thrown into the water, partially naked. Based on this, detectives suspected she had been abused and then drowned to conceal the crime. She had been in the water for approximately 30 hours, which could have damaged or destroyed some of the evidence. There was no time to waste. The body was immediately sent to the lab for an autopsy. The medical examiner determined that Katie had suffered blunt force trauma concentrated on the back of her head. It was believed that these injuries were the cause of death, not drowning. While examining the blunt force injuries, they noted the unusual shape of the hematomas. Katie may have been beaten with some kind of instrument or metal object, but the exact nature of the weapon remained unknown. Experts determined that the body had barely moved after being thrown into the water, as the downstream flow was blocked due to repair work. The remains were located very close to the house where Katie had been called for the inspection. This strongly suggested that the crime had been committed there or nearby. When law enforcement officers spoke with the residents of the house again, Jason and Pamola, they reiterated that they had not seen Katie and had witnessed nothing unusual. They suggested talking to the owner of the house they were renting. Katie's father, along with other family members, continued their own investigation. He decided to speak with the owner himself to gather more information. The owner claimed that he had arranged a meeting with Katie to assess the damage, but had never met her in person. The discussion had taken place over the phone, and he had informed the tenants about the planned inspection. This contradicted the tenants' statements. Something was clearly wrong. Now they had to figure out who was lying. Initially, it was believed that Pamela might also have been involved, but she later provided a confirmed alibi. She was in a nearby suburb when it happened. Jason, however, was a different story. He was fumbling with his testimony. This seemed highly suspicious, especially since he had nothing to prove. The investigation also revealed that someone had made several attempts to use Katie's card. But one attempt to use the payment method was successful. The payment took place at a grocery store. Luckily, law enforcement officers had video surveillance of the cash registers there. After requesting the footage, they were able to identify the person who used the card. He was a tall white man, matching the description given by the parking lot cleaner. A store employee even remembered him, saying the person who used the card had lied and said it belonged to his girlfriend. His most foolish act was leaving his real signature on the check. He signed it as Jason Funk. Now, his suspicious behavior when talking to investigators and his denial of being in the house when Katie arrived to inspect the damage were completely explained. When Jason's alleged lie was uncovered, a search warrant was obtained for Jason's home and belongings. Jason greeted officers at the door. He was immediately asked how he could have used Katie's bank card. He was unable to comment. Pamela was horrified by what was happening. Once she learned everything, she began to cooperate more willingly with the investigation. According to her, on the day Katie disappeared, Jason was acting strangely. He left for a few hours right around the time the inspector was supposed to arrive. When he returned, he was very agitated and demanded that she not say anything about his trip. Now she feared that Jason might have made her an accomplice to a serious crime. Forensic investigators thoroughly examined the area inside and outside the house. Katie's business card was found inside. A recently used fire pit was discovered in the backyard. It contained carelessly discarded items that had not even completely burned. Scraps resembling parts of a carpet were recovered, as well as a charred belt buckle. The rest of the belt was completely burned, but the metal buckle was taken for comparison with Katie's belongings. Katie's mother confirmed that she had such a belt, but the buckle wasn't unique. Furthermore, the remains of a document were discovered, and the serial number was even recovered. As it turned out, these were Katie's documents. Naturally, this became one of the most powerful pieces of evidence against Jason. The rooms were also not in order. In addition to marks indicating a struggle, bloodstains were found on the door leading to the backyard. Spatter was also left on the living room ceiling. Everything was collected for further analysis, but it would take more time. Detectives believed Katie was attacked in the living room after Jason lured her inside. He may have asked her to sign documents or offered her a drink of water. After the attack, Katie was dragged to the river through the back door. Leaving bloodstains, Jason was unable to comment on all of the detectives' questions about the evidence. He seemed increasingly withdrawn. However, after a while, he managed to concoct a flimsy excuse for Katie's bank card. He claimed he found it on a shelf above the oven in the house. He couldn't explain how it got there and admitted to using someone else's card. While forensic experts were examining the crime scene, one of them noticed a car muffler in the corner of the living room. They observed that the mounting bracket on the side of the muffler closely resembled the imprint left by what they suspected was the murder weapon on Katie's head. Further testing revealed that the muffler could have been used to bludgeon Katie to death. A major problem was that the muffler had been thoroughly cleaned, leaving no fingerprints or blood spatter on the surface. The only option was to carefully measure the mounting bracket, and then they confirmed that its shape and size were identical to the mark on Katie's head. This became further compelling evidence pointing towards Jason. All the evidence pointed to Jason's involvement, but he stubbornly denied any guilt in the murder. He even concocted an alibi, claiming he was jet skiing along the river when the incident occurred. However, this claim was impossible to verify as no one had seen him. Furthermore, he was caught in a lie, making the whole story implausible. They decided to take Jason to the station for questioning. Pamela was allowed to accompany him. They were even left alone to talk, their phones wiretapped. Of course, Jason immediately began sharing his experiences with Pamela. He denied involvement in the murder but repeatedly mentioned being suspected of hitting Katie in the head with his muffler. Intriguingly, he hadn't yet been told about the murder weapon. His behavior was becoming increasingly suspicious. Despite Jason's denial of guilt, he was charged with first-degree murder and arrested. Later, Bank card fraud and attempting to obstruct the investigation were added to the charges. The list of incriminating errors didn't end there. Detectives asked Jason for his Nike sneakers before sending him to jail. To their surprise, the lab immediately found blood spatter on them belonging to Katie. Further analysis confirmed that Jason had arrived for questioning wearing the same shoes he had worn when he committed the crime. The lab results from the envelope and other items found in Katie's car arrived. Although Jason denied being in the stolen car, fingerprint analysis proved he was. A fingerprint matching Jason's was found, exposing him as a liar. Even in the face of overwhelming evidence, Jason continued to deny involvement in Katie's murder, further fueling the growing concern and seeming to mock the Froschla family's grief. His persistence necessitated looking at more circumstantial evidence. A background check revealed Jason had a history of assaulting women and had already served time for abuse, suggesting a motive for the attack. His first victim was interviewed. She believed she miraculously survived his attack, stating that Jason was extremely cruel and that what happened to Katie couldn't have been a coincidence, adding that besides the abuse, he had planned to take her money. The Funk family was going through a difficult time, as shortly before the murder, Jason had lost his job as a car mechanic. Pamela and Jason had spent all their savings on a deposit for a new house and had to pay about $1,000 a month in rent. They were in serious financial trouble, and Jason solved the problem in the most brutal way possible. However, he couldn't even use the card, managing only to buy food. 6 months after his arrest, all forensic tests were completed, including DNA testing of blood and skin cells. All of this implicated 27-year-old Jason in the brutal murder. The man continued to maintain his innocence, even appearing on several television programs, alternately claiming he was wrongly convicted and hinting that he had been framed by enemies. However, the evidence against him was overwhelming, making a death sentence highly probable. To avoid this, Jason pleaded guilty to a lesser charge. Jason Funk pleaded guilty to first-degree murder, intentional abuse, armed robbery, and banned substances-related charges. As a result, in March 2005, Jason Funk was sentenced to life imprisonment without parole. However, even after this, Jason continued to deny involvement in the crime, repeatedly stating that he confessed simply because he didn't want to die by lethal injection. Against the backdrop of overwhelming evidence confirming his guilt, this all sounded unconvincing. The night in Swindon was calm, but that tranquility was soon shattered. A young woman named Cian Emma O'Callaghan, known for being quiet and kind, stepped out of a familiar bar and disappeared without a trace. There were no witnesses, no sounds of distress, and no leads to follow. Only the footage of her last moments remained, followed by an unsettling silence that left many questions unanswered. In a town where people believed nothing bad could happen, Cian's disappearance turned life upside down. Her friends were frantic, families were devastated, and the police found themselves caught off guard by a search that would evolve into a prolonged nightmare, revealing the chilling reality behind a seemingly ordinary man. As the smallest details began to emerge, the police realized they were no longer dealing with a simple missing person case. They were confronting a dark reality that had long been lurking beneath the surface. Cian Emma O'Callaghan was born on June 3, 1988, in Swindon, Wiltshire, and grew up in a close-knit family. After her parents separated, she lived with her mother, Elaine Pickford, and took care of her younger siblings Liam, Laura, and Aidan. Those who know Cian describe her as kind, thoughtful, and always willing to help others. She avoids trouble and conflict, and her friends admire her for being a good listener. bringing peace to their lives. She longs for a simple life with a stable job, a home of her own, and eventually a family. After graduating, Cian realized that the traditional academic path wasn't for her. She decided to work in the administrative department of a local business and quickly established herself as a responsible and dedicated person. She was known for being the first to arrive and the last to leave. Cian had a stable personal life. She lived with her boyfriend, Kevin Reap, 26. In the suburbs of central Swindon, Kevin worked in information technology. They often had gatherings with friends and family, and occasionally went on holidays to the coast. In recent weeks, her life had been normal work, time with friends, and weekend outings. Everything seemed peaceful and safe. Swindon, like many other English towns, had a slow and familiar pace of life. Neighbors were generally friendly. Shops closed early, and the streets were quiet after nightfall. Such a peaceful setting seemed unlikely for anything shocking to occur. On the evening of March 18, 2011, Cian went out with friends to Suju, a club in downtown Swindon. The night was typical, filled with music, dancing, and chatting. Surveillance footage shows them entering the club just before midnight. At 2:52 am, Cian leaves alone, telling her friends she is walking home. Her apartment, shared with Kevin, is about half a mile away. Cameras capture her walking down the street and turning a corner. But then she disappears from view. That is the last confirmed sighting of her. From that moment, there are no more leads. Kevin attempts to contact her several times by phone but gets no reply. Assuming she is still out with friends, he goes to bed. By morning, it becomes clear that she never returned home. After several unsuccessful attempts to reach her, Kevin calls the police to report her missing at 9:45 am. On March 19, officers begin searching the area where Cian was last seen. Unbeknownst to them, these first hours would prove crucial in what would become one of Swindon's most high-profile cases. On the morning of March 19, 2011, less than 6 hours after Cian went missing, the Wiltshire police made their first official response. A specialized investigation unit was quickly formed, consisting of missing persons officers, surveillance analysts, and forensic teams, all tasked with tracing Cian's steps from the moment she left the club to her expected home arrival. Officers began scouring shops along High Street, collecting video footage, and interviewing staff. The footage clearly captured Cian leaving the club and walking alone. But she never appeared on the next camera in the sequence. The distance between those two locations was short, but 32 minutes later, her phone signaled from a location nearly 12 meters away, near the Savernake Forest. This detail is suspicious because it's highly unlikely Cian could have moved to that location in such a short amount of time. By midday, police leaders had issued their first public statement on the investigation, led by Chief Inspector Steve Fulcher. He appealed to the public for information, emphasizing that the incident could involve a serious threat. At the same time, searches began in the area several miles around the club and the roads leading out of Swindon. Many volunteers began arriving in town, printing and distributing flyers with Cian's picture at bus stops, shops, and in cars. By nightfall, several hundred community members joined the search, and within 24 hours, nearly 400 people were working alongside the police. On March 20, an anonymous benefactor offered a £20,000 reward for any information that could help find Cian. Law enforcement increased patrols, set up temporary headquarters, and launched a hotline. However, investigators faced numerous difficulties. The camera network had only captured part of Cian's route. There were no witnesses, no signs of a struggle, and no personal items were found. The only lead was Cian's phone, which had gone silent. The town was filled with anxious anticipation as reporters gathered in Swindon's main square and national television began broadcasting daily updates. With media pressure increasing, Rumors began to circulate, ranging from a robbery gone wrong to theories about Xian running away. Her family and friends spoke out to refute these claims. Her boyfriend, Kevin, appeared on camera, urgently appealing for her safe return. Authorities worked to control the flow of information, but attention was rapidly growing. For a town like Swindon, known for its tranquility and safety, this situation was shocking. Within hours, it became the center of a national investigation. With each passing hour without answers, anxiety escalated. By the end of the first 24 hours, detectives possessed only fragments of information: a possible route, a time frame, and the last known location of Xian's phone. The rest remained a mystery, while the public remained hopeful that Xian would return home safely. Investigators started to realize that the situation might be more complicated than just a missing persons case. A few days after Xian's disappearance, the investigation made a significant breakthrough. After reviewing hours of city surveillance footage, detectives noticed something unusual. A dark Toyota Avensis appeared in the area where Xian was last tracked. The timestamp matched the time Xian left the center of Swindon. The vehicle slowed down, stopped briefly, and then continued toward the Eastern Highway. This became a crucial lead for investigators. Running the license plates linked the car to Christopher Halliwell, a 47-year-old resident of Swindon. He was listed as a licensed taxi driver with a mostly clean record. Aside from a few minor infractions, he seemed like an ordinary person, working nights, living with his partner, Heather, and raising 3 sons. Neighbors and colleagues described him as quiet and reliable. However, nothing about him immediately aroused suspicion. Police brought Christopher in for questioning. He claimed that on the night Xian went missing, he worked until around 1:30 a.m. before heading home. However, surveillance footage showed his car in the same streets where Xian was last seen. When officers pointed this out, Christopher began to change his story, stumbling over his timeline and eventually suggesting he might have just been passing through. Despite these inconsistencies, there was no direct evidence linking him to any crime. There were no signs of a struggle, and no items belonging to Xian were found in his car, leaving police with no choice but to let him go. However, Detective Superintendent Steve Fulcher had a strong feeling that Christopher wasn't merely a bystander. The inconsistencies in his story and his nervous demeanor raised significant red flags. As a result, the investigative team decided to proceed with covert surveillance. Christopher was placed under constant observation, documenting every move, interaction, and stop. His phone was tapped, and a GPS tracker was secretly installed on his car. For several days, Christopher's routine appeared normal as he went to work, filled up on gas, and did some shopping. But this normality started to raise concerns for investigators, as he seemed overly cautious, avoiding conversations and taking unfamiliar routes as if aware he was being watched. The surveillance operation continued, with detectives closely tracking Christopher's movements. On March 24, 2011, he left his home in his Toyota Avensis, stopping at a gas station to refuel. He drove to the outskirts of Swindon and into a rural area without cameras. He parked his car near a wooded area, removed a bundle from the trunk, and laid out the fabric seat covers on the ground. He soaked them in gasoline and set them on fire, an act that was recorded on video by officers observing from a distance. The fire quickly consumed the material, leaving only ashes. This was a critical moment for investigators, as it clearly indicated an attempt to destroy evidence. They immediately ordered his arrest. Christopher was taken into custody in a supermarket parking lot shortly after returning from his trip. He did not resist, claiming he was merely changing the upholstery. He was brought directly to Detective Superintendent Steve Fulcher, who was leading the investigation. Normally, the suspect would be taken to the station and have the right to an attorney. But Steve knew they needed to act quickly to find Xian alive. He made a controversial choice to drive Christopher to the hills near Oxford to get him to talk. Inside the car, the conversation was tense. Steve made no threats or promises, but directly questioned Sian's whereabouts. After hours of silence, Christopher finally agreed to lead Steve to where her body was located. At this point, the investigation shifted from missing persons to a violent crime. Steve was aware that he was stepping outside standard procedures. There was no formal interview, no lawyer, and Christopher hadn't been taken to the station. However, he made that decision knowing that following protocol might have prevented Christopher from confessing. In the following hours, Steve continued to take the necessary steps for the arrest. However, these decisions, while bringing progress to the case, could potentially hinder his personal career. On March 24, 2011, following Christopher's confession, police units began moving east of Swindon toward Savernake Forest. Christopher indicated a small patch of ground near a rural road as the location of Sian Emma O'Callaghan's body. Detective Steve recorded the coordinates and notified his team. Forensic experts soon arrived, sealed off the area, set up portable lighting, and began their work immediately. They meticulously excavated the site layer by layer to preserve any evidence. After several hours, they found a human body partially wrapped in fabric just below the surface. Although formal identification would follow, the investigative team was absolutely convinced it was Sian. An autopsy performed by the Wiltshire Forensic Unit confirmed the cause of death. There were signs of trauma from a heavy object impacting the back of the head and several stab wounds on the body. There were no signs of serious assault, suggesting the attack was sudden and brief. Sian may have lost her life shortly after getting into the car. The atmosphere at the site was heavy with silence as the team worked, each member fully aware of the seriousness of the situation. For them, it was more than just another case. It was personal. Steve stood by quietly as the body was recovered from the ground, feeling justified in his earlier decision to bend protocol. Without that choice, they might never have located her. That evening, news breaks across the media. In Swindon, a public mourning begins as people gather outside Suju nightclub, where Sian was last seen alive. They leave flowers and light candles at the entrance, and heartfelt messages appear along the railings. For this small, quiet town, it's a tragedy. The story of a young woman who disappeared just minutes from home has a heartbreaking conclusion. Police confirm that the body found is Sian Emma O'Callaghan, 22, a local resident. The investigation now shifts focus. It's no longer a missing persons case but a major crime investigation. Christopher Hallowell is arrested, and Detective Steve prepares to document the confession that became a key breakthrough in the case. Savernake Forest, previously just a beautiful area, now symbolizes loss. The location where a young woman's life ended and where a significant investigation began. When the investigative team realized the seriousness of the situation, Christopher told Detective Steve that there was another body. He didn't name it, only saying that the incident had happened a long time ago. Investigators quickly start searching a nearby area only a few hundred yards from where Sian was found. Forensic teams discover bones and clothing remnants. DNA testing confirms the remains belong to 20-year-old Becky Godden Edwards, who went missing 8 years prior in Swindon. At the time of her disappearance, there were no alarm bells. It was thought she had run away from home. Becky's story was tragic. During her teenage years, she battled addiction and was frequently in treatment. But one day, she left rehab and never returned. Over the years, she became unhoused and lived on the streets. Her mother, Karen Edwards, searched tirelessly for her, but every effort was in vain. Now police are telling her that Becky has been found. For Karen, the news is both heartbreaking and provides closure. After 8 years of uncertainty, forensic experts determined that Becky died due to violent actions, but the lengthy time since then means they cannot specify an exact cause. Christopher confessed to the crime, but could not recall the date or details of the incident. Investigators soon realized they were not facing an isolated case, but possibly a series of crimes involving one man. With two victims years apart, police began to review old missing persons cases for any connections to Christopher. For Becky's family, it marked the end of a long nightmare. For detectives, it shifted the focus from searching for one missing woman to investigating a potential serial offender. In the fall of 2012, Christopher Halliwell's trial took place at Bristol Crown Court, charged with the murder of Sian Emma O'Callaghan. Initially, he pleaded not guilty, but months later, he confessed. The jury accepted his confession, and on October 19, 2012, he was sentenced to life imprisonment without parole for at least 25 years. However, the case concerning Becky did not proceed to court. Prosecutors chose not to use Christopher's confession due to legal procedural issues. Under UK law, any statement made without legal counsel present is considered inadmissible. Detective Steve Fulcher's decision to interrogate Christopher outside a police station without an attorney jeopardized the case, sparking a national debate about police practices and the rights of suspects. Despite this, the families of the victims supported Steve, crediting him for uncovering the truth. Steve himself faced an internal investigation and ultimately received a disciplinary warning, leading to his resignation from the police force. He sacrificed his position, career, and reputation. While his actions led to the discovery of both women's remains, public opinion was divided. Some argued that justice should supersede legal technicalities, while others believed Steve had set a dangerous precedent by disregarding established law. Meanwhile, Christopher, who was convicted of one crime, is still serving his sentence and remains silent regarding the second charge. It wasn't until 2016 that law enforcement reopened the trial thanks to additional evidence, including DNA analysis and materials from the crime scene. Prosecutors were able to reopen the case of Becky without needing a confession this time. The jury reviewed the evidence and delivered a clear verdict: guilty. On September 19, 2016, Christopher Halliwell was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, ensuring he would spend the rest of his life behind bars. The case, which began with the disappearance of a young woman in a quiet English town, ended with 2 life sentences, forever changing 2 lives. After the trials, the lives of those involved took different paths. Detective Steve Fulcher, whose efforts led to solving both cases, was found guilty of misconduct. His choice to question Christopher without an attorney present violated police investigative procedures. Consequently, Steve faced disciplinary measures, lost his rank, and resigned from the Wiltshire Police Department, ending a 20-year career where he had risen from patrol officer to lead investigator. This particular case, the Sian Emma O'Callaghan case, ultimately cost him everything. After leaving the force, Steve moved to Somalia to work as a consultant for a private security firm. Ironically, his decision to break protocol was pivotal in solving crimes that could have remained unresolved. Without that bold, albeit improper, action, the victims might not have been discovered, and the perpetrator could have continued to harm others. Steve prioritized justice over procedure, and the victims' families did not turn against him. Sian's mother publicly thanked him for allowing them to say goodbye to her daughter. Karen Edwards, Becky Godden's mother, defended Steve as well, stating that without him, she would never have learned the truth about her daughter's fate. To them, he remained a hero despite the system's judgment. Meanwhile, Christopher continues to serve his life sentence. His name has become a symbol of one of the darkest cases in modern British history. This case has had a significant impact on the legal proceedings and public psychology, leading to many debates about the boundaries between what is legal and what is right. For the town of Swindon, where it all began, this story became a symbol of loss and broken trust, illustrating how quickly a familiar world can unravel. This narrative is not just about crime. It emphasizes the true cost of uncovering the truth. Some lost their lives, others lost their careers and reputations, But their actions ultimately provided answers that two families had desperately sought for years. What if the authorities knew a man was likely to kill, yet failed to prevent another murder? On March 17, 2014, Cherilee Shannan, terrified of Paul O'Hara, reported her fears to the police. They visited her home, listened to her concerns, and made a record of her statement. It seemed like help had arrived just in the nick of time. However, the police didn't fully grasp the danger Paul O'Hara posed. Within moments, the situation escalated rapidly. O'Hara forced his way into Cherilee's home, and violence erupted. In front of the officers who were there to protect her, Cherilee fled for her life. O'Hara chased her, attacked her, and stabbed her to death in the street. This raises a disturbing question: how could a convicted murderer commit another murder? More importantly, if the warning signs were obvious, Cherilee's fear was clear, and the authorities were aware of his past, why wasn't that enough to save her life? On March 17, 2014, Cherilee Shannan reported her fear of Paul O'Hara to the police at her home in Rawtenstall, Lancashire. She had been silent about the abuse until then. The investigation later showed she was explicitly afraid, not just uncertain or conflicted. This detail would prove significant. Two officers arrived to take her statement, assess the danger, and document the situation. Initially, the scene seemed manageable. Cherilee was willing to speak, and the system appeared to be responding. However, tension simmered beneath the surface. Cherilee had visible injuries, including a reportedly fractured jaw from days earlier. The violence was real and recent, yet O'Hara was not in custody. This disconnect, between the known threat and actual protection, was not immediately apparent. Inside the house, time seemed to slow down. The officers asked questions and recorded details. They were unaware that O'Hara had a history of lethal violence. He had murdered a previous partner years before. This crucial information was missing from their immediate assessment. Suddenly, the calm was shattered. O'Hara arrived unexpectedly. He forced his way into the house while the police were still present, armed with a hammer. The situation instantly shifted from investigation to violence, with no warning or chance for negotiation. The officers were attacked, and control was lost. Cherilee fled into the street, instinctively seeking safety in a public space. But she was not safe there. O'Hara followed her, and the attack continued in plain sight. Witnesses later described the speed and chaos, feeling helpless to intervene. Then, the fatal act occurred. O'Hara repeatedly stabbed Cherilee. The attack ended in front of the responding officers, who were too late to prevent it. Silence fell. The scene was not just a crime scene, it raised a critical question that investigators would have to answer. How could a man with a proven history of deadly violence be in this situation again? Long before Cherilee Shannan voiced her fear, the system already knew Paul O'Hara. He was not an unknown danger. Court records showed he had been convicted in 1998 for the murder of Janine Waterworth, his 20-year-old partner. The murder was violent and sustained, not a momentary lapse of control. He was sentenced to life imprisonment, recognizing the serious threat he posed. That should have been the end of his freedom. But it wasn't. Years passed. Inside prison, O'Hara's behavior was monitored, recorded, and analyzed. Reports described him as manageable and sometimes cooperative. Like many long-term inmates, his risk was evaluated based not only on his past actions but also on his current behavior. Over time, the perception of his danger decreased. Eventually, he was released on license. The decision followed established procedures, risk assessments, probation supervision, and a structured reintegration plan. On paper, his return seemed controlled. However, the past doesn't disappear with paperwork. It lingers, hidden within patterns that are difficult to detect. O'Hara started a new relationship with Cheryl. She wasn't initially told that he was a convicted murderer. He was presented as a partner, a man rebuilding his life. But later investigations revealed warning signs, subtle at first, then escalating, involving control, volatility, and reactions disproportionate to the situation. These patterns were not new. They were echoes of the past. The murder of Janine Waterworth had already established a pattern, intimacy followed by violence. The key question for investigators was not whether the pattern existed, but whether it had been fully understood and addressed. Because somewhere between the past and the present, a critical element was lost. The system held information about O'Hara's past, including police records, prison documents, and probation files. However, this information wasn't effectively communicated or prioritized, blurring its importance in daily decisions. This fragmentation led to a dangerous assumption that O'Hara's past was no longer a threat. But violence doesn't disappear with time. By the time Cheryl expressed fear, the cycle was already repeating itself. The system had seen and documented this pattern before, even sentencing O'Hara for it. This raises a critical question. If O'Hara's history was known, why wasn't it recognized in time to prevent the tragedy? The violence didn't start on the day of Cheryl's death. It had been building gradually. The investigation revealed that Cheryl experienced escalating abuse in the weeks before her death. What began as control and intimidation turned into physical harm. Crucially, she suffered a fractured jaw, a serious injury that should have immediately triggered a stronger response. And she reported it. Cheryl told probation services about her fears and what happened. She was described as terrified, indicating a clear and immediate risk. But this perception of risk didn't translate into action. The information was entered into the system, documented, and shared among professionals. Yet, it didn't generate the necessary urgency. There was no immediate removal of Cheryl from the situation, nor immediate detention of O'Hara. The man who broke her jaw remained free. This gap between reporting the abuse and receiving protection widened. Cheryl continued to live with him in an atmosphere that was likely tense and unstable. Victims in such situations often try to minimize conflict and manage unpredictability. But these adjustments only delay, not stop, the escalation of violence. And the violence was escalating. O'Hara's behavior mirrored his past: increased control, intensified violence, and growing isolation. These were familiar warning signs, consistent with his previous conviction. However, these patterns weren't recognized and acted upon in real time. By the time police were called on March 17, the situation had already reached a critical point. Physical injury, expressed fear, and a prior conviction all pointed to a clear risk. Yet, the intervention was too late and incomplete. The tragedy lies not in uncertainty. It's clear that help arrived too slowly. The warning signs were evident, spoken, recorded, and visible. The investigation focuses on a central question: knowing the danger, why wasn't it treated as imminent? The failure wasn't a single event. It was a chain of failures. By the time Cheryl was killed, multiple agencies, police, probation services, and the prison system had interacted with Paul O'Hara. Each held a piece of the story, a man with a history of lethal violence, showing signs of escalating again. But these pieces didn't come together in time. The inquest revealed that crucial information about O'Hara's past wasn't effectively shared. His prior murder conviction, the most significant factor in assessing risk, wasn't fully considered when officers responded to Cheryl's home. This lack of information shaped everything that followed. The officers responded to a domestic abuse report. They saw injuries and heard fear. But without knowing O'Hara's full history, they assessed the situation within a limited scope, serious, but not immediately recognized as potentially fatal within minutes. Therefore, the response remained procedural. There was no immediate arrest, no plan to contain O'Hara upon his return, and no assumption that he might immediately become extremely violent. The system had information, but lacked coordination. Probation services knew Cheryl was afraid. The police had been called to her home before. However, these warnings weren't connected with the necessary urgency. Poor communication, slow responses, and incomplete risk assessments created a false sense of security. Danger thrived in these gaps. O'Hara didn't need an opportunity to be created, he only needed not to be stopped. When he arrived, nothing could legally, physically, or operationally stop him. Within seconds, the consequences of this failure became irreversible. The inquest later described systemic failings, not just individual errors. Information wasn't shared, understood, or acted upon effectively. It wasn't a lack of information, but a failure to treat the existing information with the urgency it demanded. In hindsight, the situation feels heavy with inevitability. Not because the outcome was predetermined, but because the warning signs were clear. The investigation now focuses on the moment everything collapsed, when the system hesitated, and violence acted faster than response. What exactly happened in those final seconds? It happened in plain sight. Not in secret or isolation, but within reach of intervention. When Paul O'Hara forced his way into the house, the situation instantly changed from a controlled inquiry to an active threat. He was armed with a hammer. The officers inside had seconds to react, seconds that would determine everything. According to the investigation, O'Hara attacked the officers first. The attacks were sudden, direct, and disorienting. The officers' authority, their ability to protect, was immediately disrupted. Control was lost in those moments. And in that chaos, Cheryl moved. She ran. Out of the house and into the street. It was an instinctive decision, to move instead of staying still, to create distance. The environment changed, but the threat remained. O'Hara followed. Witnesses later described the scene as rapid, chaotic, and hard to follow in real time. What started inside the house spilled out into public view. There was no pause between pursuit and escalation. No hesitation. Then the weapon changed. The hammer was no longer the weapon of choice. A knife appeared, and the attack became fatal. He stabbed her repeatedly. Each movement was deliberate and sustained. The violence continued even after she stopped resisting, until there was no doubt about the outcome. Officers, recovering from the initial assault, moved to intervene. But the sequence had progressed too far, too quickly. By the time they regained control, Cheryl was critically injured. The street, moments earlier an ordinary residential area, became a crime scene. Silence followed, but not immediately. It arrived slowly, as shock set in and the reality of what had happened became undeniable. She died from her injuries. The presence of police wasn't enough. The response wasn't fast enough to match the threat. And the attack, carried out in the open, proved it was not unpredictable. It was direct, immediate, and unstoppable once it began. The investigation now shifts beyond prevention and into consequence. After the violence ended, how quickly did the system respond, and what did it do with the man who had done this before? The violence ended as suddenly as it began. In the immediate aftermath, there was no escape. Paul O'Hara didn't run away or disappear in the confusion. He remained at the scene, contained, surrounded, and quickly overpowered by officers who had just witnessed the attack. This wasn't a man who needed to be hunted down. He was already caught. Emergency services arrived. Cheryl Shannan was treated at the scene and then taken for urgent medical care. but her injuries were too severe. Despite their efforts, she died shortly after. The attempt to save her life only confirmed the loss. And with that, the case shifted from prevention to prosecution. O'Hara was arrested at the scene. There was no question of his involvement. The evidence was immediate, direct, and witnessed. Officers had seen the escalation and had been attacked themselves. There would be no need to reconstruct events. The crime had unfolded before them. But the clarity of the action doesn't lessen the weight of the context. As investigators officially started their work, O'Hara's past became a major focus. His previous murder conviction, once a minor detail, was now seen as crucial. It wasn't just history, it suggested a pattern of behavior. There were no complicated lies to disprove or missing timeframes to figure out. Instead, the focus was on documenting the evidence, filing charges, and legally defining the crime. The question wasn't who did it, but how was this allowed to happen again? He was charged with murder. The evidence was overwhelming: eyewitness accounts, police officer statements, and physical evidence from the crime scene. The case progressed smoothly, unlike many investigations. However, a deeper sense of unease lingered. This wasn't the first time the legal system had dealt with Paul O'Hara in connection with a deadly act. His arrest, while immediate, felt like a repeat occurrence, the second death linked to the same person. Therefore, as the legal process moved forward, the main question wasn't about his guilt. It was about acknowledging a pattern. Would the court treat this as an isolated incident or as a continuation of a pattern already established in his previous conviction? The court didn't need to look for uncertainty. It needed to address the repeated behavior. When Paul O'Hara was tried for Cheryl Shannon's murder, the facts were clear. The attack was witnessed, and the sequence of events was undisputed. No one questioned that he was the killer. But this trial involved more than just the evidence. It involved his history. O'Hara's previous conviction for Janine Waterworth's murder was presented not just as background information, but as crucial context. This wasn't a first offense or a one-time escalation. The prosecution argued it was a second act in a pattern of deadly violence against women he was close to. The courtroom atmosphere reflected the seriousness of the situation, controlled and focused. But underneath, there was a growing awareness that the system had encountered this man before, judged him capable of killing, and still allowed him to be free. Now, they were facing the consequences of that decision. Medical evidence confirmed the severity of the attack: multiple stab wounds and sustained force. The injuries matched the descriptions from witnesses and officers, an assault that continued even after she couldn't resist. This wasn't a brief loss of control, but prolonged violence. According to court records, the defense didn't dispute the basic facts. There was no other suspect, and no denial strong enough to break the chain of evidence. Instead, the defense focused on factors that might lessen his punishment, such as his mental state, the circumstances, and interpretations of his intent. But the pattern of violence remained clear. The judge directly addressed it. O'Hara was described as a very dangerous man. This wasn't based only on the current crime, but on the repeated pattern of his behavior. The previous life sentence hadn't prevented him from reoffending, and it hadn't permanently eliminated the risk he posed. Now, the court had to ensure that this failure wouldn't happen again. The sentence reflected this understanding: life imprisonment, with a minimum term reflecting both the brutality of the crime and his history of violence. This time, the court's decision seemed final. There was no assumption that he could be rehabilitated or safely returned to society. Only containment. As the proceedings ended, the legal system had given its answer to the crime. But outside the courtroom, a question remained that no sentence could fully resolve. If he was already known to be dangerous, why did it take another death for that to be treated as a permanent truth? After the sentence, the media attention faded. What remained was the void left by Cheryl Shannon's death. For her family, the case didn't end with the verdict. It became a quiet, heavy burden, a life forever changed by a moment that should have been prevented. She had asked for help, reported her fears, and followed the advice given to victims. And yet, she still died. The inquest that followed focused on the systemic failures that led to the event, rather than the event itself, which was already understood. Reports analyzed breakdowns in communication between agencies, how risk was managed, and missed chances to take decisive action. The conclusion was based on factual findings. There were indeed failures. Specifically, information about Paul O'Hara's past was not fully shared or given enough importance. His previous murder conviction was not properly considered when making real-time decisions. The risk he posed, which had been documented and proven, was not treated with the necessary urgency. The system was aware of the risk. However, it did not act accordingly. This disconnect became the central issue after the case concluded. It highlighted not only a tragedy but also a warning about how incomplete information can lessen the sense of urgency, how procedures can delay action, and how patterns of violence can repeat if not fully recognized. Cases like this leave a feeling of quiet unease, rather than loud grief. This is because the outcome feels less like an unpredictable event and more like a failure to connect knowledge with appropriate action and warnings with effective protection. Paul O'Hara will remain in prison. However, that is not the complete resolution. The more significant impact lies in the questions that remain for institutions, investigators, and anyone responsible for assessing risk. When someone has already demonstrated a capacity for violence, at what point does the system stop providing opportunities for repeat offenses? And how many warnings are required before they are finally treated as critical? The Paul O'Hara case does not simply end with justice being served. It ends with a lesson learned through the consequences of those failures. The storm had already taken the power. Wind pressed against the small home in Shelby, North Carolina, rattling its quiet certainty. Inside, sometime after midnight on February 14, 2000, 9-year-old Asha Degree lay in bed she shared with her older brother. By all accounts, it was an ordinary night. No signs of distress. No disruption that could explain what would follow. At approximately 2:30 a.m., according to later statements, Asha got out of bed. There was no forced entry. No evidence of struggle. According to the Cleveland County Sheriff's Office, the front door was quietly opened. Asha stepped outside into the dark, into cold rain. Investigators would later confirm she took a small backpack. Inside were personal belongings and clothes. Packed deliberately. Hours passed before the absence was discovered. Around 6:30 a.m., her mother, Aquila Degree, went to wake the children for school. Asha was gone. Within minutes, panic replaced confusion. Family members searched the immediate area. Then, a 911 call. The case moved from private fear to public emergency. But even before the call, something else had already begun to unfold on Highway 18. According to later witness statements given to investigators and reported by outlets, such as Summaries, at least 2 motorists reported seeing a young girl walking along the roadside between approximately 3:45 and 4:15 a.m. She was alone. Wearing light-colored clothing. Carrying something. One driver, concerned, turned his vehicle around. As he approached, the girl ran off the road and into the darkness, disappearing into nearby woods. It would later be believed, though not officially confirmed in absolute terms, that this was Asha, a 9-year-old. Walking into the storm. fleeing from the only adult who stopped to help. By sunrise, search teams would begin retracing that same stretch of highway. But the first and most haunting question had already taken shape: why did she leave at all? And more urgently, what was waiting for her out there? There was nothing in Asha's life that suggested she would leave. According to family members and investigative records referenced by the FBI and multiple media outlets, Asha was raised in a structured, attentive household in Shelby, North Carolina. Her parents, Harold and Aquila Degree, maintained routines that emphasized discipline, school, and church. The children had a set bedtime. There were rules about phone use, television, and staying inside. It was, by all outward appearances, a stable environment. Asha was described as shy, quiet, cautious. She was afraid of the dark. She was afraid of dogs. These details were consistently repeated by family and confirmed in early reports. They would later become critical contradictions in the case. Because on the night she disappeared, Asha walked alone into darkness. Into a storm. Along the highway. That behavior did not align with the child everyone knew. At school, she was a fourth-grade student with no known behavioral issues. Teachers reportedly described her as well-mannered and responsible. She had friends. She played basketball. Just days before her disappearance, she had participated in a game where she fouled out and was visibly upset, but according to her family, she recovered quickly. There were no lingering signs of distress. There was no history of running away. No known exposure to strangers online. In 2000, internet access for children in that household was limited, if present at all, according to statements from investigators. No evidence has publicly confirmed grooming or external communication leading up to that night. Her routine on February 13th, the day before she vanished, followed a familiar pattern. Church, family time, school preparation. At some point that evening, there had been a brief power outage due to a storm. The family spent time together before going to bed. Nothing unusual was reported. No arguments. No disciplinary incidents. No emotional triggers that could clearly explain a decision to leave home in the middle of the night. And yet, sometime after 2:30 a.m., Asha packed a bag and walked out. Investigators would later consider the possibility that she left voluntarily, but under the influence, either internal or external. According to law enforcement statements over the years, the theory that she was meeting someone has never been ruled out, though it remains unproven. Because what troubled investigators most was not just that she left, it was how prepared she seemed to be. She took specific items. Clothing. Personal belongings. Packed with intention. Not the impulsive act of a frightened child. But not entirely the plan of an adult either. The road was nearly empty. Highway 18 stretched through rural Cleveland County like a dark corridor, bordered by trees and open land. In the early hours of February 14, 2000, the storm had not yet passed. Rain fell steadily. Visibility was low. The kind of night where drivers slowed down, focused only on what their headlights could hold. According to investigative reports later cited by the FBI and regional media, the first sighting came sometime between 3:45 and 4 a.m. A motorist traveling along Highway 18 noticed a small figure walking along the roadside. At first, it did not register as unusual. But as the vehicle drew closer, the shape became clearer. It was a child. A young girl, walking alone, wearing what appeared to be light-colored clothing. She carried something, possibly a bag. The driver continued on. Moments later, uncertainty set in. The image did not align with the hour, the weather, or the place. The motorist turned around. When the vehicle approached again, the girl reacted. She ran. She left the roadside and moved quickly into the darkness, disappearing into a wooded area nearby. The driver, unsettled, did not pursue further. A second witness would later report a similar encounter. Another motorist, traveling along the same stretch of highway within the same time window, observed a young girl walking southbound. This driver would also later come forward after hearing news of Asha's disappearance. Law enforcement treated them as credible. The timing aligned. The location matched the direction away from Asha's home. According to the Cleveland County Sheriff's Office, these sightings became a central pillar in reconstructing her last known movements. But they raised deeper questions. Why was she walking along that specific route? Why did she avoid help? And more critically, was she alone? At that stage of the investigation, there was no confirmed evidence of a vehicle picking her up. No direct witness to an abduction. No physical sign of struggle along the roadside. Only a pattern. A child moving with purpose, then vanishing into the trees. Search teams would later comb that exact area. Dogs were brought in. Officers walked the terrain where she had been seen leaving the road. But the woods gave nothing back. No footprints that could be definitively tracked. No immediate evidence of where she went next. By daylight, the road had changed. What had been an empty stretch of highway hours earlier was now crowded with patrol cars, volunteers, and search teams moving with urgency. The call had come in shortly after 6:30 a.m. A 9-year-old girl was missing. Last seen in her own home. No signs of forced entry. No explanation. No broken locks. No signs of entry. No forensic indicators of a struggle inside the house. According to early investigative findings, this strongly suggested that Asha had left on her own. Within hours, the case escalated. According to the Cleveland County Sheriff's Office and later FBI summaries, deputies began canvassing the area immediately surrounding the Degree home. Family members, neighbors, and volunteers joined the search. The focus at first was simple: assume proximity, assume she had not gone far. But then the witness reports came in. Drivers had seen a young girl walking along Highway 18 hours earlier. The direction matched. The timeline held. The search shifted. By mid-morning, law enforcement redirected resources toward the highway corridor. Ground teams began retracing the exact stretch where the sightings had occurred. Tracking dogs were deployed. Helicopters surveyed from above. Officers moved through wooded areas on foot, scanning for any disturbance, footprints, discarded items, or signs of struggle. But the terrain was difficult. Wet ground from the storm had compromised potential tracks. According to investigators, scent tracking dogs were used but struggled to maintain a consistent trail, possibly due to weather conditions and the passage of time. Attention, as is standard in missing child cases, briefly turned toward the immediate circle. Family members were interviewed. Timelines were checked. According to law enforcement statements, no evidence publicly emerged to implicate the parents or close relatives. Their accounts were consistent with the physical findings inside the home. Then, as search teams expanded beyond the highway and into nearby properties, something began to surface, small, almost insignificant at first. The first real break did not come from the highway. It came from a place no one expected: a tool shed. Several days into the search, as investigators expanded their radius beyond Highway 18, attention turned to a property along the same route where Asha had reportedly been seen. The location belonged to a local business, situated near the roadside, where one of the motorists had described seeing the young girl leave the pavement and run into the darkness. According to investigative reports later referenced by the FBI and regional media, search teams began examining outbuildings in the area. One of them, a small storage shed, stood slightly apart. Inside, the air was still, undisturbed at first glance. But as investigators looked closer, something felt out of place. Items had been moved, not significantly, not violently, but enough to suggest recent presence. Then came the details. Candy wrappers, a pencil, a hair bow. According to law enforcement statements, these items were later identified as consistent with belongings Asha had been carrying or wearing before her disappearance. The hair bow, in particular, was believed to match those owned by her, though some details have not been publicly confirmed with absolute certainty. What mattered was the implication. Asha had likely made it to this shed. She had left the road. She had entered a confined space. Possibly to hide. Possibly to rest. Possibly because she was afraid. She took shelter. But for how long? And what happened next? The shed did not provide signs of struggle. No confirmed blood evidence. No clear indication of forced removal. Just traces of presence, followed by absence. It became the last location where investigators could reasonably place her with any degree of physical certainty. After that point, the case fractured again. No footprints leading a way that could be reliably tracked. No witnesses beyond the road. No confirmed timeline beyond the early morning hours. For over a year, the case stood still. No confirmed sightings. No suspect. No clear direction. The trail that had once stretched from a quiet home to a dark highway, then into a roadside shed, had dissolved into absence. Investigators continued to pursue leads, but none produced a definitive breakthrough. Then, in August 2001, more than 18 months after Asha Degree vanished, the case shifted again. This time, the evidence did not emerge near Highway 18. It surfaced miles away. According to the Cleveland County Sheriff's Office and widely reported, construction workers along Highway 18 North, near Morganton, uncovered something unusual while excavating land for a new development. Inside a black trash bag, double-wrapped, was a backpack. It had been hidden beneath the soil. When authorities were notified and the contents examined, the connection became immediate. The backpack was identified as belonging to Asha Degree. The distance was significant, approximately 26 miles from her home. Inside the backpack, investigators found personal items believed to have been packed by Asha the night she left. Clothing. Objects tied to her identity. Among the reported contents, though not all officially confirmed in full detail, was also a New Kids on the Block t-shirt and a book not linked to her household, suggesting possible external contact or influence. The condition of the bag raised further concern. According to investigators, this indicated awareness, an attempt to hide evidence rather than abandon it. The discovery reframed the entire case. Until that point, the possibility of voluntary movement, however unlikely, remained part of the discussion. But a buried backpack, wrapped and transported miles away, pointed strongly toward third-party involvement. An abduction. Or at minimum, post-disappearance interference. The timeline, however, remained fractured. There was still no confirmed moment of contact. No witness to a vehicle. No forensic link publicly tying the backpack to a specific individual. The case had changed. After the discovery of the buried backpack, investigators no longer treated Asha Degree's disappearance as a mystery of intent, but as a probable crime involving another person. The focus shifted from why she left to who she encountered after she did. And yet, even with that shift, the path forward remained uncertain. According to statements from the Cleveland County Sheriff's Office and later FBI involvement, hundreds of leads were processed in the months and years following the discovery. Tips came from across the state, and eventually, across the country. Some were based on memory. Others are on speculation. Many led nowhere. But a few stood out. One of the most discussed leads involved a vehicle. In 2016, after years of re-examining the case, the FBI and local authorities publicly announced renewed interest in a specific type of car, described as a dark green, early 1970s Lincoln Continental Mark IV, or a similar model. According to the investigation, witnesses had possibly seen a vehicle matching the description near the area where Asha was last observed along Highway 18. The detail was not new, but the emphasis was. Authorities believed the vehicle could be connected to her disappearance. However, no suspect was publicly identified in connection with that vehicle. No arrest followed. The lead, like many others, expanded the possibilities without narrowing them. Investigators also revisited the timeline repeatedly. They analyzed the gap between the shed and the buried backpack. They re-interviewed witnesses. They examined whether Asha had been lured, possibly by someone she trusted, or someone who had observed her routine. According to official statements, the theory that she was meeting someone has remained under consideration, though never confirmed. There was no verified evidence of communication. No letters. No phone records indicating contact. Despite the scale of the investigation, no forensic evidence has been publicly disclosed linking any individual to Asha's disappearance. No DNA match. No confession. No direct witness to an abduction. The case moved forward in fragments. Each new lead raised hope, then collapsed under scrutiny. Each theory offered structure, then dissolved under a lack of proof. And over time, the investigation entered a different phase. Not closed, but suspended between knowledge and absence. Because even after years of work, one fact remained unchanged: there was still no definitive answer to what happened after Asha left that shed. And without that moment, the truth remained just out of reach. Years passed, but the case of Asha Degree never moved into the past. It remained active, revisited, reanalyzed, and, at times, quietly reawakened. According to the FBI and the Cleveland County Sheriff's Office, the investigation has never been closed. It exists in a state of persistence, waiting for something, one detail, one memory, one mistake, to shift the balance. Asha would have grown up. That fact became part of the public narrative. Age-progressed images were released over the years, showing what she might look like as a teenager, then as an adult. These were not just visual tools, they were reminders. That somewhere, theoretically, a life could still exist beyond the point where all evidence had ended. But investigators have been careful. While hope remains part of the case, the evidence tells a more complicated story. The buried backpack. The distance. The concealment. These are not elements typically associated with a safe outcome. According to law enforcement statements, the working assumption has long leaned toward foul play, though no official declaration of death has been made due to the absence of a body. And that absence matters. Without it, certain legal thresholds cannot be crossed. Certain conclusions cannot be formally declared. The case remains suspended, not solved, not forgotten. In recent years, authorities have renewed calls for information. Advances in forensic science, particularly in DNA analysis, have offered new avenues. Cold cases once thought unsolvable have been reopened through technology. Asha's case is among those that could still change, but technology alone cannot solve everything. For Asha's family, time has not dulled the question. What happened after she left the shed? Who crossed her path? And why has that moment remained hidden for so long? The case of Asha Degree is not defined by what is known. It is defined by what is missing. A child leaves home in the night. She is seen walking alone. She hides. Then, she vanishes. And somewhere between those points, the truth still waits.